The glacier had been making sounds for 3 days before any of us admitted out loud that we could hear them. Ice groans. Everyone who works near the Mendenhall knows that. Ice cracks and pops, and sometimes it booms like artillery when a serac collapses somewhere deep in the field. But ice does not knock. Ice does not strike itself in patterns of 3 paws and then answer from the far side of the valley. On the morning of October 9th, I stood on the west shore of Mendenhall Lake with a clipboard in my hand and a half-finished trail report on it, and I listened to something out on the ice knock 3 times weight and receive 3 knocks in reply from the timber behind the visitor center. The report on my clipboard was for a washed-out section of the West Glacier Trail. I never finished writing it. What I ended up writing instead took me 4 notebooks, cost 3 people their peace of mind, and put 1 man in a hospital bed in Juneau where he still refuses to sleep with the window blinds open. Before I take you out onto that ice, I want to know who is out there with me tonight. Wherever you are listening from, drop your city and your local time in the comments below. It matters to me more than you know. When I read that someone in Manchester is listening at 2 in the morning, or someone in Manila has this playing on their drive to work, it reminds me that I am not carrying this story alone anymore. And believe me, this is not a story a man should carry alone. My badge says United States Forest Service. The Mendenhall Glacier Recreation Area sits inside the Tongass National Forest, which means the rangers here are forest rangers, and I have been one of them for 11 years. My name is on my incident reports as B. Brooks. Benjamin to the people who work with me. 42 years old, born in Sitka, raised on boats and rain. I tell you this not to introduce myself the way a man shakes hands at a party, but because you need to know that I am not a tourist who got spooked by a bear. I have hauled injured hikers off Nugget Falls in sleet. I have tagged black bears in culvert traps and stood close enough to a sow with cubs to count the ticks in her ears. I know what belongs in my valley. What came down off the ice field that October did not belong anywhere. The knocking was only the beginning of it, and if I am being honest with you, the knocking was not even the strangest thing that happened that first morning. The strangest thing was the smell. The wind was coming off the lake, cold and clean, the way glacier wind always is, carrying that mineral scent of ground rock that we call glacial flour, and threaded through it, arriving in pulses like something breathing it toward me, was a stench I can only describe as a wet dog rolled in a tide flat and left in a gym locker for a week. It hit me, vanished, hit me again. I turned a full circle on the shore. Nothing but gray water, gray sky, and the blue-white wall of the glacier a half-mile out, calm as a photograph. I radioed the visitor center and asked Carol Watson, our lead interpreter, whether any of the morning kayak tours had reported a dead humpback or a sea lion carcass washed into the lake. Carol is 50 years old and has worked that desk for 2 decades. She does not rattle. There was a pause on the radio that went on a beat too long, and then Carol said something that put a cold finger on the back of my neck. She said, "Ben, funny you should ask. A visitor just came in asking if we keep gorillas." I want you to sit with that sentence the way I had to. Gorillas. In Juneau, Alaska. The visitor was a retired schoolteacher from Ohio named Judith Kelly. 68 years old, sharp as a tack, the kind of woman who corrects the spelling on comment cards. She had been photographing Arctic terns near Photo Point at first light when she saw what she assumed was a man in a fursuit crouched at the waterline about 200 yards up the shore, dipping its arm into the lake. She watched it through her camera's zoom for almost a minute. Then it stood up. Judith told Carol, and later told me, in a voice that never once wavered, that when it stood, its knees were at the height of the boulder beside it. And that boulder came up to my chest when I went out and measured it that afternoon. She had photographs, 17 of them. 16 showed a shape that skeptics would call a stump, a shadow, a hoaxer, a trick of glacier light. The 17th photograph is the reason I am talking to you tonight instead of sleeping. In the 17th photograph, the shape is mid-stride, one arm swung forward, and it is looking directly into the lens from 200 yards away, as if it heard the shutter. As if, across 200 yards of open water and wind, it heard a camera shutter click. I interviewed Judith myself that afternoon in the break room behind the visitor center, with the rain starting on the skylights and a cup of terrible government coffee in front of each of us. I have taken hundreds of witness statements in my career, and there is a texture to a reliable one. Reliable witnesses hesitate. They correct themselves. They say things like, "I am not sure about the color, it might have been the light." Judith did all of that, and it made the parts she refused to soften land like hammer blows. She was not sure about the color of the thing. Reddish-brown, maybe darker along the spine. The morning light was strange. She was not sure how long its arms were because it moved too fluidly to freeze in her memory. But she was absolutely sure about 3 things, and she counted them off on her fingers like the teacher she had been for 40 years. 1. It drank from the lake with its hand, cupping water to a face she never clearly saw, which no bear on this earth has ever done. 2. When it stood in one single motion, no push-off, no hunch, half a ton of mass rising like a man getting out of a chair. And 3. At the end it did not run from her. She lowered her camera to change the battery, and when she raised it again 4 seconds later, 4 seconds, the shoreline was empty. 200 yards of open beach with nowhere to hide, and it was simply gone, and Judith Kelly leaned across that break room table, looked me in the eye, and said, "Young man, I taught 8th graders for 4 decades, and I know when I am being watched by something that is smarter than it wants me to know." I logged it as an unusual wildlife report. That is the box I checked on the form. Unusual wildlife. There is no box on a Forest Service incident form for what Judith Kelly photographed, and by the end of that month I would have given anything for that to still be my biggest problem. Because at 4:47 that same afternoon, dispatch relayed a call that emptied every thought of fursuits and gorillas out of my head. A guided ice cave expedition, 7 clients and 1 guide, had missed its check-in by 3 hours. 8 people were somewhere on or under the Mendenhall Glacier. Night was 90 minutes out. A storm was stacking up over the Juneau icefield, and the last garbled radio transmission from the guide, a 57-year-old veteran named Charles Sanders, contained only 5 words before it cut to static. The 5 words were, "They are in the walls." Search and rescue in glacier country is arithmetic with lives on both sides of the equation. Every hour a missing party spends on the ice, their odds drop. Every hour you send searchers onto that same ice in failing light, you risk turning rescuers into casualties. I made the calls fast. Juneau Mountain Rescue was mustering but would not have a full team staged until dawn. The Coast Guard helicopter out of Air Station Sitka was grounded by the incoming front that left a hasty team tonight on foot, and it left me to lead it because I knew the west side ice margin better than anyone else on duty. Douglas James met me at the trailhead with 2 packs already loaded. Douglas is 54, a Tlingit man whose family has fished and hunted this country since before there was a Juneau to name the ice after. He is our trails supervisor on paper and our institutional memory in practice. He did not say hello. He stood there in the blowing grit with his hood up and said, "Ben, the tour was headed for the Suicide Basin Caves." Then he said something else, quietly, almost to himself, and I want to repeat it to you exactly, because everything that happened afterward folds back into this one sentence. He said, "My grandmother used to say the ice belongs to somebody, and in a hungry autumn you knock before you cross it, and you leave the shore when the knocking answers back." I had known Douglas 11 years and never once heard him talk like that. I asked him if he had heard the knocking that morning. He looked at me for a long moment, and instead of answering, he reached into his pack, took out a bear bell, and threw it into the bed of his truck. He said, "We go quiet tonight. Nothing that rings, nothing that shines that does not have to." The third member of our hasty team was Natalie Ramirez, 35, our wildlife tech. A woman who once talked a hypothermic climber down off a moraine using nothing but patience and a thermos of Tang. Natalie brought the thing that changed the whole shape of that night. 3 weeks earlier, she had set a grid of trail cameras along the glacier's western margin as part of a mountain goat study. 12 cameras. When the missing persons call came in, she pulled the memory cards on her way to the trailhead, thinking the cameras might have caught the tour group hiking in, which would confirm their route. 11 cards showed goats, a wolverine, 2 black bears, and 400 pictures of wind-blown alder. The 12th camera was gone. Not fallen, not chewed by a bear, and I have seen plenty of camera boxes with bear teeth punched through them. The steel security case had been unbolted from the tree. Unbolted. The lag bolts were laid on a flat stone at the base of the trunk, side by side, parallel, like surgical tools on a tray. Natalie photographed the stone before she touched anything, and I have that photograph on my phone to this day. 4 bolts, perfectly aligned. 800 meters from the nearest trail. The camera 1 position south of the missing one had caught something on its final night of operation. Natalie showed us on her laptop right there in the truck. Engine running, heater roaring, rain starting to tick against the windshield. The image was time-stamped 3:11 in the morning. In the foreground, alder leaves, silver in the infrared flash. In the background, between 2 trunks, stood a figure. It was not close. It was not clear. But the camera was mounted at chest height on a man, angled slightly upward toward the Goat Cliffs, and the figure's head was above the top of the frame. Above it, Natalie measured the trunk spacing the next week and worked the geometry. She is careful, methodical, allergic to exaggeration, and her math put the top of that figure at no less than 8.5 feet off the ground. Here is the part one needs you to hear while we are still standing at the trailhead in the rain, before everything goes wrong. By the way, my statistics show that most of the people listening to this story right now have never interacted with the channel, never left a like, never subscribed, never typed a single word below. If this story has its hooks in you already, take 3 seconds and fix that now. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and tell me in the comments what you would have done standing at that trailhead. Would you have gone out onto that ice in the failing light, or would you have waited for morning? Your answers keep these stories coming, and honestly, some nights your comments are the only thing that convinces me to keep telling them. While we did our final gear check, Douglas told me something I should have paid closer attention to, and it is one of those seeds that a story plants early and a survivor waters with regret. He said that in 1962, 2 ice climbers went missing on the west margin in a September storm, and when the search party found them alive 9 days later, sheltered in a moulin, both men told the same story and were laughed out of Juneau for it. They said something had brought them food. Snowshoe hares, necks cleanly broken, laid at the lip of their shelter each night, and once a king salmon, 10 miles from the nearest salmon water, still wet. The report is in the district archives. I have read it since. The final line of that 1962 report, typed by some ranger 60 years before my watch, reads, "Subjects in good condition, accounts attributed to exposure, no follow-up recommended, no follow-up recommended." 60 years of no follow-up recommended, and now 8 people were missing on the same ice, and the ice had started knocking. We went out onto the ice. The forest told us before the ice did. Any ranger will tell you the woods have a soundtrack, and you learn to read it the way a sailor reads water. Squirrels scolding means a marten or a hawk. Ravens gathering and gossiping means a kill nearby. Total silence means a big predator moving through. But the West Glacier Trail that night was giving us something I had never heard in 11 years and hoped to never hear again. The forest was not silent. It was evacuating. Twice, porcupines, animals that fear nothing because nothing sane touches them, crossed the trail ahead of our lights at a dead waddle, heading downhill, away from the ice. A great horned owl blew past my head so low its wingtip brushed my hood, flying in the rain, which owls despise, downhill, away from the ice, and at the bedrock transition where the trees give up, our lights found a black bear, a big fall fat boar that should have been denning, standing at the tree line looking back toward the glacier, and it let 3 humans walk within 40 feet of it without so much as turning its head, because whatever calculation was running behind its eyes, we did not rate. I have thought about that bear for years. Every animal on that mountainside was leaving, and the 3 of us, the clever ones, the tool users, the top of the food chain, were the only creatures headed the other way. The West Glacier Trail climbs through Hemlock and Devil's Club before it breaks out onto polished bedrock, and from there you drop onto the glacier margin itself, a chaos of gravel cones and blue melt channels. We roped up at the ice edge. The wind had died, which sounds like mercy and is the opposite of it, because on the Mendenhall the wind is a constant companion. And when it stops, the silence has a pressure to it, a held breath quality that makes your own footsteps sound like trespassing. We moved by headlamp, following the wand line the tour company used to mark the safe route toward the caves. Every 100 meters, a bamboo wand with orange flagging tape. Wand after wand after wand, a dotted line of human confidence drawn across a thing that has never once cared about human confidence. At wand 19, the line stopped. Not ended, stopped. Wand 20 lay 40 feet to the left of the route, snapped in half. Wand 21 was 30 feet to the right, driven upside down into a crack in the ice with such force that the bamboo had split into a broom of fibers. And Wand 22, the last one we ever found, had been placed, not thrown, placed upright and gently, in the exact center of a melt pool, where no boot print marked the mud rim around the water, where no human being could have stood to plant it. Douglas looked at that wand standing in its still black pool, reflected perfectly in the lamplight, and he took off his glove and put his bare hand flat against the glacier, the way you would put your hand on the flank of a horse to calm it, or to ask its permission. Then he said the second thing I will never forget. He said, "It moved the trail. It is not hiding from us, Ben. It is hurting us." We found the first member of the tour group 40 minutes past the broken wands, and the condition we found her in rearranged something in my chest that has never moved back into place. Her name was Brittany Price, 32 years old, a nurse from Portland celebrating her divorce with an Alaska trip, which is a detail I know because she told me all of it later, in a rush, the way people talk when the talking is the only thing keeping the shaking down. We found her inside a shallow melt cavity in the ice, curled up with her knees to her chin. She was not hiding in it. I need to be precise about this because it is the hinge the whole night turns on. She had been put in it. Brittany told us the group had reached the main ice cave on schedule. Charles Sanders, the guide, got them all inside. 7 clients under a ceiling of blue glass with meltwater braiding down the walls. And then the light at the cave mouth went out. Not clouds, not dusk. She said it was like a curtain of shag carpet drawn across the entrance, and the cave went deep blue, then no blue at all, and the smell arrived. That same low tide and wet dog stench I had caught on the shore that morning. Thick enough in the cave that one of the clients started gagging. Charles shouted for everyone to link arms. And then, Brittany said, the ceiling began to boom. Something on top of the glacier, above 30 feet of solid ice, was striking it. Rhythmic, patient. 3 strikes, silence, 3 strikes. The same pattern I had heard across the lake 12 hours earlier. The group broke exactly the way groups do. Some froze, some ran. Brittany ran out through a side passage barely wider than her shoulders out into the twilight, and she told us that as she ran across the open ice she heard footsteps beside her, matching her pace. She never saw what made them. She said the steps were soft, almost gentle, an enormous padded weight placed with total control, and that whenever she veered toward the crevasse field to the north, the footsteps drifted closer and pushed her back the way a dog moves sheep away from a cliff edge. When her legs finally gave out, something took her hood, lifted her, she guesses 80 pounds of exhausted human plus gear, lifted her the way you would lift a kitten, and set her into that melt cavity out of the wind. The last thing she remembers before we arrived is a sound from directly above her hollow. She swears it was not a growl. She swears, and remember this woman works trauma shifts for a living and does not frighten easily. She swears it sounded like humming. Natalie found the tracks while I was getting Brittany into a heat blanket. Barefoot prints in October on glacier ice running parallel to Brittany's boot prints for over 300 meters. 22 inches heel to toe, 8 inches across the ball of the foot. The stride measured out at 51 inches at a walk. Natalie knelt beside the clearest print with her measuring tape and her camera, doing everything by the book, and I watched her hands and they were steady, and then she looked up at me and her voice was not steady at all. She said, "Ben, the toes flex, look at the push-off. There is mid-foot pressure here. You cannot fake weight distribution in ice. There is a documentary crew in Juneau every summer asking about hoaxes, and I promise you no man alive fakes half a ton of moving weight." I crouched next to her and made myself look at that print the way I would look at any sign, professionally, one detail at a time, because the alternative was to look at it all at once and let the size of it climb into my head. The heel strike was deep and clean. The ice had compressed, not shattered, which takes enormous weight applied smoothly, a controlled roll of mass from heel to toe. Dermal ridges. I am going to say that again because in 11 years it is the single detail I have never been able to argue myself out of. In the mud rim where the print crossed a patch of glacial silt, there were dermal ridges, the fine parallel lines of living skin, like a fingerprint the length of my forearm. Natalie cast it with the dental stone she carries for goat and wolf tracks, and while it set, neither of us said one word, because the wind had stopped again, and in that pressing silence we could both hear it, faint, rhythmic, and far too close. The sound of something very large breathing somewhere above us on the ice slope, slow and even. The unbothered breathing of a thing that has never once in its long life needed to hide from anything, and was not hiding now, only waiting. Half a ton. She said it the way a researcher says things, as a measurement, and the measurement hung in the freezing air between the 3 of us while somewhere far out in the ice field, muffled by distance and falling snow, we heard wood on ice. 3 knocks. Douglas answered them. Before I could stop him, before I even understood what he was doing, he unclipped his ice axe, raised it, and struck the glacier 3 times. The sound went out across that frozen plain like a struck bell. Then he stood absolutely still with his head bowed, an old man in the snow with his eyes closed, listening, and I realized I was watching something older than my badge, older than the Forest Service, older than the name Mendenhall itself. The reply came from 2 places at once, 3 knocks from the north, 3 knocks from the east. Douglas opened his eyes and translated the situation for us in a voice as flat as the lake. "There are 2 of them," he said, "and they are telling each other where we are." Brittany made a sound at that, a small broken sound, and grabbed my sleeve, and said the thing that turned my blood to slush. She said no, not 2. When the entrance went black, there was one on top of the cave and one blocking the mouth at the same time. and the one on the ceiling was answering knocks from somewhere else. There are at least 3, and Charles and the others are still in that cave, and the one at the entrance, was not trying to get in. It was keeping them there. It was keeping them for something. The storm hit the ice field at 9:20 that night, and every rule I had ever been taught said turn around. Visibility dropped to the reach of a headlamp beam. Snow came in horizontally, dry and hard, hissing across the ice like sand. I stood over my radio with 5 lives in a cave 2 kilometers away, an injured survivor who needed evacuation, and a forecast that promised the mountain rescue team could not stage before first light. The rulebook said retreat. I want you to know that I knew the rulebook and I broke it with my eyes open. I sent Natalie back down the wand line with Brittany, 1 strong navigator with 1 ambulatory survivor, and Douglas and I went north, into the storm, toward the caves. What I know about the crossing that followed comes in pieces, because memory in a whiteout is a shattered mirror. I remember the melt channels, blue veins we jumped in the dead white nothing. I remember Douglas ahead of me on the rope, appearing and vanishing in the snow like a photograph, developing and undeveloping, and I remember the moment the escort began. That is the only word I have for it. Escort. Off to my right, at the very edge of the lamp glow, a shape kept pace with us. Upright, massive through the shoulders, tapering at the hips, arms too long, swinging with a hinged, easy rhythm no man in a suit has ever managed. Because a man in a suit walks like a man, and this walked like weight itself had learned to stroll. Every time I turned my lamp directly toward it, it was not there. The instant the beam swung forward, it returned to the corner of my eye. For 40 minutes it walked with us, and here is the fact I have never been able to file away in any drawer of my mind. Twice, Douglas started drifting left in the whiteout, toward what I later learned from the survey maps was a crevasse zone that has eaten snow machines whole. And twice out of the blind white to our left came a single sharp knock, and Douglas corrected course, and the shape to our right kept its distance and kept walking. It was not stalking us, it was steering us. Something in that storm did not want us dead, and the horror of that took years to bloom in me, because a thing only keeps you alive when you are worth more to it another way. There is a moment from that crossing I have never told anyone, not Douglas, not the review board, not the specialist from the university. Somewhere past the halfway point, my crampon strap failed. I knelt in the lee of an ice block to fix it, Douglas holding the rope taut ahead, snow screaming past horizontally, and as I worked the buckle with numb fingers, the storm around me went quiet. Not the wind. The wind kept howling out there, but around me, in a pocket maybe 10 feet across, the air went still, the way it goes still when you step behind a wall. I did not understand it then. I understood it when I stood up and turned, and my headlamp swept across a surface a foot from my shoulder that was not ice, it was hair. A wall of coarse, rain-matted, reddish hair rising past the reach of my light, and it was moving gently in and out, with that same slow, unbothered breathing, and I realized that something had been standing over me the entire time I knelt, blocking the storm with its body, the way you would shield a match with your hands. My lamp traveled up. I could not stop it. Chest. The wet gleam of a collarbone under the hair, the underside of a jaw like the prow of a boat. And then Douglas hauled the rope twice, hard, the signal to move, and I turned and walked, and I did not look back, because Douglas had told me at the trailhead, in that same quiet voice, whatever happens out there tonight, Ben, if you meet it, do not meet its eyes. Looking is asking a question. You are not ready for the answer. At 11:03 we heard the screaming. Not animal screaming, human. A man's voice, torn ragged, carried in shreds on the wind from somewhere ahead, screaming 2 words over and over. The words were, stay together. And under the screaming, vast and resonant and wrong, coming up through the ice itself into the bones of my feet, was a call I will be hearing on my deathbed. It began like a whale song, slid up through a howl, and ended in a chattering roar with a rhythm in it, almost speech, almost, and the almost is the terrible part. Syllables in the mouth of something the size of the night. Douglas gripped my shoulder, put his mouth beside my hood, and shouted the sentence that carried us the last kilometer. He shouted, that call is not aimed at the people, Ben. Something else is on this ice tonight, and the big ones are sounding the alarm. The cave mouth appeared out of the storm like a wound in the world, a blue-black arch fringed with icicles the size of church organ pipes, and the first thing my lamp found at the entrance emptied my lungs. The snow at the threshold was churned into a battlefield. Barefoot prints, dozens of them, in at least 3 distinct sizes, the smallest 14 inches, The largest, a 26-inch monster that my whole boot fit inside with room to spare. Overlapping, pivoting, dug in at the toes, something had stood its ground here. Many somethings. And around the perimeter of that churned arena, in a rough half-circle, chunks of glacier ice the size of engine blocks had been driven into the snow like fence posts. Douglas played his lamp across that half-circle of standing ice and said one word: barricade. They were inside. Charles Sanders had kept them alive with the discipline of a man who had guided that ice for 2 decades. 5 human beings pressed together in the deepest chamber, huddled under every layer they carried. Blue light from our lamps flooding over faces I will never forget. Raymond Gray, 60 years old, a retired welder from Michigan, had a dislocated shoulder and a story that he could only tell in pieces for months afterward. Judith Kelly was there, the school teacher with the 17 photographs, and I learned she had booked the cave tour that same afternoon specifically because she wanted a better look at what she had seen across the water. And God forgive me, some part of me has always admired that. Benjamin Brooks is my own name, so imagine the strange chill of pulling a heat blanket around a shivering man while Charles introduced him as our last client, and hearing that this stranger and I shared it. Small world, the man whispered through blue lips, and in that cave, at that hour, the coincidence felt less like chance and more like the night rhyming with itself. Charles took me aside as far as the chamber allowed and gave me his report in the low, steady murmur guides use when they do not want clients to hear, and his composure made the content worse. He said the entity at the entrance had stood there for 6 hours, not pacing, standing, an 8 or 9 foot silhouette against the storm glow, shoulders wider than the axe rack at the ranger station, watching them with an attention he could feel on his skin like heat from a stove. Twice, Raymond had tried to rush past it in a panic, and twice a hand the size of a snow shovel had simply pressed him back into the cave, and Charles kept repeating this word, with restraint. It never growled at us, Charles said. It chuffed, like a horse. And every time that other call came off the ice field, the big chattering roar, it turned its head toward the sound and its whole body went tight. And Ben, I have guided bear country my entire adult life, and I know what I was looking at. I was looking at a sentry. Raymond Gray gave me his piece of the night while I splinted his shoulder, talking through gritted teeth and fragments, and his fragment is the one that visits me at 3 in the morning. Raymond had been closest to the entrance when everything began, and in the last usable light before the sentry filled the cave mouth, he saw the thing that had been left on the ice threshold. An arrangement. That was his word, and he fought for it through the pain, waving off easier words. Not a pile. An arrangement. Flat stones from the moraine, carried at least a kilometer, set in a spiral on the ice, and in the center of the spiral, standing upright, the missing wand 20 from the tour route, and hanging from the wand by its strap, Natalie's stolen trail camera, lens pointed into the cave, pointed at them, recording them, for all Raymond knew, all night. He said that of everything that happened, the shoulder, the cold, the roaring out on the ice field, that camera was the thing that broke him. Because a monster in the storm is an animal, and an animal you can understand, but a creature that steals your machine, learns which end sees and aims it at you like a question, that is not an animal. That is a neighbor you did not know you had, taking your census. Judith Kelly, for her part, spent that entire night doing the most Judith Kelly thing imaginable. She counted. While the others huddled and prayed, this 68-year-old woman sat against the ice wall with her dead camera in her lap, and counted every silhouette that crossed behind the meltwater curtain deep in the chamber, keeping tally by moving pebbles from one coat pocket to the other. In the morning she handed me the pebbles as if turning in an exam. There were 11 distinct passages of movement through the walls of the glacier in a single night, and when I asked her how she could be sure she had not counted the same individual 11 times, she gave me the look she must have spent 4 decades perfecting on 8th graders and said, because they were different sizes, young man, and 2 of them were small, and the small ones moved the way children move when they have been told to hurry past a doorway and not stare. There are little ones, Mr. Brooks. Whatever is in this ice, it is not a monster. It is a family, and families only hide their children when something is hunting. Then Charles told me about the walls, and the 5 words from his last radio call finally made their terrible sense. Deep in the chamber, behind the meltwater curtain, the ice was not silent. Things moved inside it. Shadows the size of men and larger, distorted by a meter of ancient blue glass, sliding through passages in the glacier that no survey has ever mapped. Passages that should not exist, because the Mendenhall is monitored by satellites and radar, and yet here was a corridor system alive with movement. They are in the walls, Charles had radioed, and he had meant it literally. The glacier was not a glacier. The glacier was a house. The extraction itself deserves one honest paragraph, because the reports flatten it into logistics, and it was the furthest thing from logistics. Moving 6 exhausted hypothermic civilians across 2 kilometers of crevassed ice in the tail of a storm should have taken us 5 hours and probably a life. It took us 2 hours and 11 minutes, and the reason is a route. When we came out of the cave mouth, the churned battlefield of Prince had changed. A new line of tracks ran from the entrance toward the moraine, one individual, the 26-inch giant, walking a route no map suggested and no guide had ever flagged. And everywhere that route crossed a hazard, something had been done about it. A snow bridge over a crevasse had been tested, punched through deliberately at its weak edge so no one could trust the wrong part of it. A melt channel too wide to step had a slab of ice laid across it, a slab that Douglas and I together could not have lifted. I am a federal employee. I have testified in court. I am telling you under whatever oath you like that something walked out of that cave ahead of us and built a road, and Charles Sanders walked that road at the front of the rope line with tears freezing on his face, saying quietly over and over to no one human, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." We got them out at 2:40 in the morning, in the eye of the storm's back edge, 6 rescued and 2 rescuers on a rope line across the ice, and the escort came with us the entire way. I counted them at the edge of my light. 3 shapes, 1 ahead, cutting the route, 2 flanking, herding us home. And at the moraine, where bedrock finally replaced ice under my boots, the largest of them stopped at the glacier's edge as if the rock were a border it had signed a treaty about, and it stood there as the storm light grayed toward dawn, and it raised one arm. I have told myself for years it was reaching for balance. Raymond Gray, drugged with cold and pain on the litter behind me, saw it too, and Raymond has no doubts at all. He says it waved. The reports I filed used the words unidentified wildlife activity 11 times. A specialist from the university came up in November to look at Natalie's track casts, measured everything twice, and left without giving us a conclusion, only a request that we call him directly, not the department, directly, if it happened again. The missing trail camera was never recovered. The tour company quietly rerouted its cave expeditions to the east margin. Brittany Price sends a card every Christmas. Charles Sanders retired in the spring, and at his retirement dinner, after the toasts, he stood looking out the window toward the ice field and told me the only thing that still bothered him was the arithmetic. "Think it through, Ben," he said. "They held us in that cave. They held us gently, all night, while their big males screamed battle language at something out on the ice field. They were not protecting themselves from us. They were protecting us. So the question that keeps a man awake is simple. Protecting us from what?" Douglas James put in his retirement papers the same week Charles did, and before he left he took me to see his grandmother's cousin, a woman in her 90s living out the Glacier Highway, who received us with dried fish and tea and listened to my whole account without once looking surprised. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time, and then she asked me a single question. She asked whether the big call, the roaring chatter off the ice field, had come from the north. I said yes. She nodded slowly and said the hairy ones have lived behind the ice longer than her people have lived beside it, and there had always been an understanding, and understandings hold as long as everyone stays on their own side. Then she said the glacier is shrinking. Every year more ice gone, the maps redrawn, the caves collapsing, the backcountry opening up like a door left off its latch. "Their house is melting," she said, setting her cup down with a click I still hear. "They are not coming out because they want to meet you, Ranger. They are coming out because the walls are coming down, and everything that lived behind those walls with them is coming out too. The gentle ones herd you off the ice. Ask yourself what the other ones do." I have one more piece of evidence, and I have never put it in any official file. In March, when the winter storms finally broke, I skied out along the west margin to recover Natalie's remaining cameras. At the tree where the 12th camera had been unbolted, the one taken the night before everything began, I found the steel security case sitting upright at the base of the trunk, returned. The camera inside was intact. The memory card held 4 months of images, and most of them were what you would expect: snow, an alder, and one very confused porcupine. But the final image, the last picture that camera ever took before its battery died, was taken from a height of roughly 9 feet, angled downward, at the ranger station 2 miles away, with my truck in the parking lot, at 3:11 in the morning. Something had carried that camera. Something had watched us with our own eyes, learned what the little clicking box was for, and given it back when it was finished. There is a mind on the Mendenhall Glacier. It is patient, it is organized, and whatever it stood guard against on the night of October 9th is still out there on the ice field too, because some nights, when the wind lies down and the lake goes still, the knocking starts again, 3 and 3, from 2 directions, and I stand on the shore with my coffee going cold and I do not answer anymore. Douglas told me why. You knock before you cross the ice, he said. You do not knock from the shore. From the shore it means come over. That is the story of the Mendenhall Glacier incident, and I am trusting you with it because official channels never will. If this story reached down your spine the way living it reached down mine, do 3 things for me before you go. Hit the like button so this reaches the next person sitting alone in the gloom with their headphones on. Leave a comment telling me your city, your local time, and whether you would have answered those knocks. And subscribe to the channel because Sir Belicho, Mr. Belicho, and Mr. Geronimo are where I bring the files nobody else will read out loud, and the next one is already sitting open on my desk. Until then, stay off the ice after the light goes, and if something knocks, think very carefully about what your answer means. Static came first. Then Brittany Price said 4 words into the last open channel she would ever use, and her voice was not afraid in the way a person sounds when they still believe help is coming. It was calm in the particular way that happens only after fear has already finished its work on a person. It walks like a man, then nothing, not a scream, not a call sign. Just the low hiss of an open channel with no one speaking into it, and underneath that hiss, so faint that for 2 seasons afterward I tried to convince myself I had imagined it, something that might have been breathing. I am going to stop here, only for a moment, before I take you any further into this account, because there is something I want from you first, and it is not much to ask. If these channels are new to you, if this is your first time sitting with a story told the way I tell them, then subscribe now to Sir Belicho, to Mr. Belicho, and to Mr. Geronimo, because what happened along that stretch of coast deserves more than one place to be remembered. Leave a comment and tell me the city you are listening from tonight, and the hour on your own clock, because I like to know how far a warning has to travel before it reaches someone. And if you are still with me by the time this account reaches its end, press that like button, because it cost you nothing, and it tells me the telling was worth finishing. Now let me take you back to where all of this began, 6 days before that transmission, to a coastline the ice has been carving apart for 10,000 years, long before anyone wore a badge and called any part of it a district. 6 days earlier, I was the one who took the call. Holloway Point Ranger Station sits where the preserve folds into the northern edge of Kenai Fjords, a low green building with a radio that hisses more than it speaks, and on the evening in question I was the only one left on shift when dispatch patched through a report of an overdue kayaker. Her name was Brittany Price, 32 years old, traveling alone, a strong paddler by every account. The kind of visitor who filled out her backcountry permit in neat handwriting and listed her return time with the confidence of someone who had never needed to be found. She had put in that morning at a gravel launch near Hollow Creek, planning a long loop along the inlet and back before evening closed over the water. Evening that year arrived earlier than the tourist brochures like to admit. September in that part of the world does not fade gently into night. It simply withdraws the light, the way a hand pulls back from a stove. I logged the report, radioed the harbor for any boats still out, and drove the gravel road down to the launch myself, because that is the job, whatever the job happens to look like on the days no one is watching. Her rental car sat alone in the lot, doors locked, a paperback novel and a half-empty water bottle left on the passenger seat as though she meant to come back to them within the hour. The tide was going out. I stood at the edge of the gravel and watched the gray water pull back from the shore in long ribs, and I remember thinking, the way a person thinks small, useless thoughts in moments that will later feel enormous, that the water looked like it was breathing too. Behind me the tree line climbed straight up from the gravel into a wall of Sitka spruce and hemlock so dense that the last of the daylight seemed to stop at its edge rather than pass through it. And somewhere above that wall the Harding icefield sat under its own private weather, feeding glaciers down into fjords that never fully warmed even in the height of summer. Douglas James found the kayak 2 hours later, drifting empty near a rock shelf a mile up the inlet, paddle still clipped to the deck. Douglas ran the water taxi out of the small harbor near the station, an old fishing boat called the Sea Wren that he had kept running for 11 years past its reasonable lifespan through nothing but stubbornness and marine tape. He radioed the position, and something in his voice, some flatness that had not been there an hour earlier, told me he had seen more than an empty kayak, even if the only thing he described to me over the radio was the kayak itself. We searched the shoreline near the drift point until the light gave out completely, calling her name into trees that gave nothing back, not even an echo. Because true coastal rainforest does not echo, it only absorbs. Moss hung from every branch. Ferns rose as tall as a person's chest. Devil's club grew thick enough to open a hand to the bone if a person grabbed it without thinking. By full evening we had found her dry bag, torn open, its contents scattered across 20 feet of understory in a pattern that made no sense for wind or tide or any animal I could name for the incident report I would write later that night. We found one print in the mud above the tide line, half collapsed by rain, but the shape of it stayed with me longer than anything else from that first evening. It was not the neat oval of a bear's forefoot, and it was not the long narrow track of a wolf. It carried weight on 2 points the way a boot does, heel and ball, spaced in a stride too long for anyone I had ever met, and even ruined by rain, even half filled with runoff. There was something to the shape of it that made me crouch beside it far longer than any professional reason required, my flashlight beam shaking very slightly in a hand that does not usually shake. I did not radio in what I thought that print looked like. I wrote it up as unidentified. That is the word the file still uses, unidentified. I have had 6 days now to decide whether that word was a lie, and I have decided that it was, but it was the kind of lie a person tells so that a search can continue in daylight instead of ending that same night in a report nobody upstream would believe. I stood, finally, meaning to radio the station and request an early morning air search. It was in reaching for the radio clipped to my vest that I heard it, once, from somewhere up the slope behind the tree line, a sound low enough to feel more than hear. And it did not belong to any bird or bear or wind I had spent 6 seasons learning the voice of. I did not move. I did not call out. I only stood very still in the mud beside that half-ruined print and waited for it to happen again, and it did not. And somehow that was worse. By morning the search had grown into something official, which meant paperwork, which meant Charles Sanders standing in the station doorway with a clipboard in the particular calm of a man who had spent 30 years learning to sound reasonable regardless of what his gut was telling him. Charles ran the district out of the main office in Seward and drove up whenever a report escalated past what one ranger alone could manage. He was not unkind about it. He simply believed, the way a person believes the sun will rise, that every disappearance in his district had an explanation that fit inside a standard incident form, and he intended to find that explanation using the same methods that had worked for him for 3 decades. Grid searches, air support when weather allowed it, which that week it mostly did not. Interviews with anyone who had been on the water in the last 72 hours. Natalie Ramirez arrived from the southern station an hour after Charles, already in her field gear, already asking the right questions before she had finished shutting her truck door. Natalie and I had worked the same district for 3 seasons, long enough that we no longer needed to discuss who took point on a slope and who covered the flank, and long enough that she could look at my face across a briefing table and know I was leaving something out of my report. She did not call me on it in front of Charles. She waited until we were alone, loading gear into the truck, and asked only one quiet question. "What are you not writing down?" I told her about the print. She did not laugh, and she did not ask the questions I expected, the ones about bear identification guides or wolf pack ranges. She only nodded once, filed it away the way she filed away everything useful, and kept loading rope into the truck bed. Raymond Gray showed up without being called, the way he always did when something in the district went wrong. Raymond had retired from full ranger duty 8 years earlier but never quite stopped being one, and Charles let him volunteer on searches because Raymond knew terrain that had not been surveyed since before half the current staff was born. He was 60 years old, built narrow and weathered the way certain trees get on exposed ridgelines, permanently bent slightly forward as though still listening for something. He did not join the briefing. He found me alone at the truck, pressed something small and cold into my palm, and closed my fingers around it before I had gotten a clear look at what it was. It was a brass bell, old enough that the finish had gone dull and green in the seams, roughly the size of a walnut, threaded onto a leather cord soft with age. "Keep this on your pack," Raymond said. "Not on the outside where it swings loud and stupid. Low, near the hip, where you can hear it without thinking about it." I asked him why, the obvious question, and he looked past me toward the tree line for a moment before answering, which was not really an answer at all. "You will know why if you ever need to," he said. And if you never need to, you can give it back to me at the end of the season and we will never speak of it again. I clipped it to my belt because arguing with Raymond had never once been worth the effort, and within an hour I had stopped noticing its quiet, ordinary jingle at all. The way a person stops noticing their own heartbeat. The search moved in 3 teams up the inlet, following the drift line from the empty kayak backward into the preserve. Douglas ferried the boat teams from cove to cove aboard the Sea Wren, and even from a distance I could see him watching the tree line more than the water, which was not like him at all. Douglas had run that water for 2 decades and treated the coastline the way other people treat a familiar hallway in the middle of the night, without needing to look at it directly to know exactly where everything stood. That week he looked at it directly, constantly. We found nothing through the morning except the ordinary wrongness of a search that is not going well. No further tracks, no second dry bag. The birds were the first thing Natalie mentioned, around midday, in the flat tone she used for observations she did not yet trust herself to interpret. No gulls working the tide line. No ravens in the spruce along the ridge, though ravens owned that ridge every other day of the year we had worked it. Just the wind moving through wet branches, and beneath the wind, occasionally, a silence so complete it felt deliberate, as though something large enough to matter had gone very still on purpose, somewhere close enough to watch us return the favor. The worst of it happened at dusk, when Charles called the day's search and we were hauling gear back down to the cove for pickup. I caught movement at the tree line above the beach, upright, pale against the deep green behind it, gone the instant I turned my headlamp toward it directly. Natalie saw it too. Neither of us said anything to Charles, who was 20 feet ahead and already speaking into his radio about tomorrow's grid coordinates. What I remember most clearly, more than the shape itself, which my mind has softened and reshaped so many times since that I no longer fully trust my own memory of it, is the bell. For perhaps 2 full seconds, walking normally, pack swinging normally, the small brass bell on my hip made no sound at all. Then it did again, ordinary and bright, as though nothing had happened. I told myself the strap had simply pinched the clapper for a moment. I have told myself a great many reasonable things since that evening. Not all of them have held up. That night, back at the station, I took the bell off my belt and set it on the desk in front of me, and for a long while I only looked at it, turning it once between 2 fingers, listening to the small ordinary sound it made, waiting, without fully admitting to myself what I was waiting for. 3 days in, Charles wanted to scale the search back to 2 hours around the original coordinates, citing weather and a protocol that measured hope in diminishing statistical curves I had heard him quote before, always accurately, always in a voice that made the numbers sound like mercy rather than surrender. Natalie asked for 1 more full day before any reduction. Charles gave us 1 more day. Not because the numbers had changed, but because Charles Sanders had 30 years of practice reading the faces of the Rangers under him, and something in mine had apparently told him that arguing further would cost more than it saved. We spent part of that extra day away from the grid entirely, at Natalie's suggestion, driving the coast road to a weathered cabin set back from the water where Judith Kelly had lived for as long as either of us had worked the district. Judith was 68, sharp-eyed, entirely unsurprised to see us on her porch before I had finished explaining why we had come. Her family had fished and worked that coastline for 3 generations before the park boundaries existed on any federal map, and she had buried enough of that family, in enough unexplained ways, that she had stopped bothering to sound apologetic about what she believed. She listened to my description of the print without interrupting, and she listened to the part 1 almost did not tell her, about the bell going quiet at dusk, with an attention that made the hair rise on my arms before she had said a single word in return. "Some who have seen it call it a dogman," she said eventually, "and I understand why the word gets used, tall and canine enough about the jaw and the stance to earn it. But that word makes it sound smaller than it is, and I have always thought small words are how people make big fears easier to carry around in their pockets." Then she told me 2 things, plainly, the way a person passes down a recipe rather than a warning, because to her it had never been anything as dramatic as a warning. It was simply how the coast worked, the same as tide tables. The first thing she told me was this: it does not want to be seen twice by the same eyes in the same night. If you see it clearly, 1 steady look, and then you look away, you are finished with each other for that night, whatever else happens around you. But if you look away and then look back again to be certain of what you saw, that second look is an invitation, and it will treat it as one. Do not confirm it, she said. Whatever you see, believe it the first time, and do not look back to check. The second thing she told me was quieter, and she watched my face very closely while she said it, as though gauging how much I already knew. "This is not new to your station," she said. "Long before you wore that badge, there was a young ranger who came to this same porch asking the same question you are asking now, more than 30 years gone. I will let him tell you the rest of that, if he ever chooses to. It is not mine to give away." I did not need to ask her the ranger's name. I already knew the shape of Raymond's silence too well by then to mistake it for anything but exactly this. We drove back into cell range an hour later to a message from Carol Watson, the wildlife specialist stationed at the preserve's interior camp, asking us to call as soon as we could reach a signal. Carol ran the goat and bear population surveys for that stretch of coast, methodical to the point of dryness, not a person given to alarm over ordinary field data. Her voice was not dry when I called her back. She had pulled memory cards from 3 trail cameras that morning and found 3 separate images, hours apart, of the same tall, pale shape, crossing the same game trail, upright each time, never fully in frame. And beneath the 3rd camera she had also found what remained of an adult black bear, dead less than 2 days, its injuries unlike anything in her survey experience, and she used the word wrong twice in describing them before catching herself and switching to more careful, more measured language that did not actually make the finding sound any less wrong. We regrouped at the cove that evening to plan the next day's approach toward the interior camp, and Douglas offered to keep the Sea Wren anchored overnight near the dock rather than motor back to the harbor in failing light, since we would need the boat again at first light regardless. Charles approved it. I remember the small ordinary relief in that decision, the sense that at least the water route was handled, one fewer thing to worry about before night fully settled. Douglas radioed in once more that night, close to midnight, his voice pitched low in a way that made Natalie sit forward from across the station's single-desk radio. "Something is on the boat with me," he said, or near it, he could not tell which, only that the Sea Wren was rocking on water too still to explain the motion, and that he could hear something moving along the hull, slow, deliberate, testing the boat the way a hand tests a locked door. We told him to get below deck, to lock whatever could be locked, that a team would come now, immediately, weather or no weather. He said something back that the recording later captured clearly enough. 3 words, steady at first and then not steady at all. "I see it now." Then the channel filled with static, and did not clear again that night, no matter how many times we called his name into it. We found the Sea Wren at first light, still anchored, rocking gently on water that had gone glass calm the way it often does just after a storm passes through overnight, though no storm had been forecast and none had shown on the station's weather radio. Douglas was not aboard. His radio was not aboard either, nor his headlamp, nor the small tackle box he kept his personal effects in, as though he had either left in a great hurry or been made to leave without any say in the matter. There was a long gouge along the port hull, deep enough to show pale wood beneath the paint, at a height that made no sense for any rock or log or ordinary vessel strike, because it sat roughly level with where a person standing on the dock beside the boat would place a hand. Charles stood at the rail of that boat for a long time without speaking, and when he finally did speak, it was not to argue about statistics or grid reduction. It was to authorize, in a voice gone flat and careful, full search resources for both Douglas and Brittany, effective immediately, and to request, quietly, that I walk him through everything I had not put in my written reports so far. I told him about the print, the bell, Judith's porch, Carol's cameras, and her carcass. He listened without interrupting, the same way Judith had listened to me 2 days earlier, and when I finished he said only one thing: "Write none of that in the file yet, not because I do not believe you, because I do not yet know how to write it in a way that keeps this search open instead of shutting it down entirely, and I need it open." That was as close as Charles Sanders ever came, in my hearing, to admitting what he had started to believe. Benjamin Brooks arrived at the station that same morning, unannounced, having driven 18 hours from Ohio the moment Brittany's disappearance made a regional news brief. He was Brittany's older brother, 42, still dressed for an office he had walked out of without changing, and he had the particular exhausted intensity of a person who had stopped sleeping 3 days earlier and did not intend to start again until his sister was found. He had questions we could not fully answer and demands we could not fully meet, chief among them a demand to join the search teams directly rather than wait at the station for updates, and Charles, against what I suspect was his own better judgment, agreed to let him accompany a support team along the outer grid the following day, provided he stayed within sight of a ranger at all times. I remember him standing in the station parking lot that first evening, still in his office shoes, staring at a topographic map of the preserve as though he could will his sister's location onto the paper by looking hard enough. and I remember thinking that grief and stubbornness look almost identical on a person's face when neither one has slept. He did not stay within sight. We discovered this at dawn 2 days later, when his tent at the staging camp was found empty, his boots gone, a hand-drawn map of the interior trail system missing from the supply tent along with a headlamp and most of a first aid kit. He had left no note, though he did not need to leave one. Anyone who had spent even one evening near Benjamin Brooks that week could have written the note for him. He had gone looking for his sister alone, along the same interior trail toward Carol's camp where the cameras had captured their clearest images yet, and he had perhaps 6 hours of head start on a team that now had no choice but to follow him at a dead run instead of a careful grid pace. We moved fast and loud that morning, which went against every instinct I had built over 6 seasons of careful, quiet fieldwork. But a loud search was the only kind that stood a chance of reaching Benjamin before whatever had reached Douglas did. Natalie kept pace beside me without a single complaint about the pace itself, though I could hear the effort in her breathing by the second hour. Raymond came too, older than any of us, refusing outright when Charles suggested he stay back at the staging camp, and something in the set of his jaw told me this was not a discussion he intended to lose. We picked up Benjamin's trail near a creek crossing shortly before noon, boot prints pressed deep and hurried into the mud, and beside them, unmistakably, a second set of prints, the same 2-point weight distribution I had crouched over 6 days earlier at the original launch site. Close enough now, fresh enough now, that no one in the group spoke for a long moment after Natalie pointed them out. We called Benjamin's name into the trees ahead of us, the way a person calls a name when they still believe calling it might do some good. Somewhere up the slope, past a stand of hemlock so thick the light barely reached the ground beneath it, something called an answer back. It was not his voice, not fully, though for one terrible fraction of a second it shaped itself into something close enough to the syllables of his sister's name that every one of us stopped walking at once and stood very still in the wet moss and did not call out again. We followed that answer for another hour, moving slower now, every one of us listening for the bell at my hip the way sailors once listened for a particular buoy in fog, though none of us had said this out loud, and I am not certain any of us could have explained why the small ordinary sound of it had become so important to the whole group's nerve. The trail Benjamin had cut through the understory grew easier to follow the closer we came to Carol's interior camp, not because he had slowed down, but because whatever walked beside him for the last half-mile of it had begun dragging one hand, or something like a hand, low enough to snap ferns at a height no animal I knew would ever bother to disturb. Carol met us at the edge of her camp clearing, pale, radio already in hand, telling us in short controlled sentences that she had heard movement circling the perimeter since well before sunrise, too heavy and too patient to be a bear working a food cache, and that she had not dared step outside her tent to check which direction it favored. Charles told her to stay inside the camp's fenced enclosure with the door secured, and for once Carol did not argue methodology. She simply nodded and did exactly as she was told, which told me more about how the last hour had sounded to her than anything she could have said aloud. Beyond the camp, the trail climbed toward a narrow ridge that looked down into a fold of the fjord Douglas had once described to me as the coldest water in his entire route, colder even than open ocean, because the ice at its head never fully stopped feeding it. We found Benjamin's headlamp first, still switched on, lying in the moss at the ridge's near edge, its beam pointed uselessly at the sky. Then, 20 feet further, tucked into a hollow beneath an overturned root mass where a fallen spruce had torn a wound out of the hillside years earlier, we found Brittany Price. She was alive. I want to say that first, because everything else about finding her belongs to what came after, and I do not want it lost beneath the rest. She was alive, curled into a space barely large enough for her own body, filthy and shaking and staring past all of us, at nothing in particular, and when Natalie reached for her gently she did not flinch away, but she also did not speak, not her name, not a single word, then or in the days that followed, only a low continuous sound in her throat that none of us ever fully described the same way twice afterward. It was Raymond who saw it first, up on the ridge itself, standing at the tree line the way it had stood at every tree line since this account began, closer now than any of us had let ourselves imagine it would come. Tall enough to have to bend its head slightly beneath the lowest branches, pale in the way old bone is pale rather than the way snow is pale. shaped enough like a man, in the shoulders, in the stance, that some old animal part of every human brain in that clearing reached instinctively for the word person and then recoiled from it just as fast, because whatever stood in that tree line was assembled from pieces that did not belong together on the same frame, and its eyes, when the last of the light caught them for one full second, held nothing in them that I would call recognition, only attention, patient and total. Raymond did not run. He looked at it once, steadily, the way Judith had described, and then he looked away, down at Brittany, at the work of getting her onto the litter we had carried in, and he did not look back up at that tree line again. Not once, no matter how badly I could see the wanting to in the set of his shoulders. Natalie was not so fortunate. She glanced up while helping lift Brittany, saw it, looked away as instinct demanded, and then, a heartbeat later, some older and less disciplined part of her mind pulled her eyes back toward the tree line to confirm what she had seen, the way anyone alive would want to confirm it, the way I wanted to confirm it too. I caught her jaw in my hand before her eyes had fully completed that second turn, forced her face back down toward the litter, toward Brittany, toward anything at all that was not that tree line, and I said only one word, low and flat, the word Judith had given me on her porch 3 days earlier. Do not. Natalie's whole body went rigid under my grip for one endless second, and then, slowly, she nodded and did not look up again. The bell at my hip had gone completely silent by then, had been silent, I realized, since somewhere back near Benjamin's headlamp, the way it had gone silent for 2 seconds at dusk 6 days earlier. Except this time it did not start again, and in the total absence of that small ordinary sound, the whole hush of that ridge felt suddenly unbearably loud with everything else, wind and breathing and the low continuous sound still coming from Brittany's throat. Benjamin broke first, and none of us have blamed him for it in the time since, whatever it cost. He had come 18 hours by truck and 6 hours on foot to find his sister, and now that she was in front of him, filthy and shaking and unable to say his name, some final wall inside him gave out entirely. He shouted something, her name or an apology or both at once, and he looked up at that tree line, fully, directly, a second confirming look thrown straight at the thing standing in it, and took one full step toward it before any of us could reach him. What happened after that step happened fast enough, and in gloom deep enough beneath that tree line, that I have never been able to give Charles a clean account of it for any official file, and I am not going to attempt one for you now either, because I do not fully trust my own memory of those seconds, and because some things are better carried as a shape in the mind than laid out whole. I will tell you that there was a sound. I will tell you that Natalie's hand found mine in the moss and did not let go until long after the sound had stopped. I will tell you that when the tree line was empty again, Benjamin Brooks was not standing in it, and none of us, not that night, not in the 6 days since, has found him. We carried Brittany down off that ridge at a pace that should not have been possible on that terrain, and none of us spoke above a whisper until the lights of Carroll's camp came into view below us. It was somewhere in that silent descent, maybe a quarter mile from the ridge, that the bell at my hip began very faintly to ring again, a small even sound behind us in the hush, steady enough, patient enough, that for the rest of that walk I could not convince myself it was only the ordinary motion of my own stride causing it. The official report took 3 weeks to finalize, and I know this because Charles let me read every draft of it before it went upstream, which was not standard practice, and which I understood to be his own quiet way of showing me the shape of the choice he was making. The final version credits Douglas James and Benjamin Brooks as presumed lost in a search and rescue operation complicated by severe weather and difficult terrain. It mentions no prints. It mentions no cameras, though Carroll's memory cards went into evidence storage rather than deletion, which Charles insisted on personally, over the objections of at least one person above him in the chain who wanted the entire incident closed as cleanly as possible before the season's tourism numbers were finalized. Charles never told me why he insisted on keeping those cards. I never asked him directly. Some conversations are better left in the shape of the silence around them. Raymond found me alone at the station 2 nights after we brought Brittany down, sitting at the same desk where I had once turned his bell over between 2 fingers without knowing what I was waiting for. He did not sit down across from me. He stood in the doorway the way he always seemed to stand at the edge of things, and he told me, finally, the rest of what Judith had left for him to tell. More than 30 years earlier, in his own first season on this coast, Raymond had gone looking for a missing trapper with a search team of 4, and he had come back with a team of 3, and a superior far less patient than Charles Sanders had made it very clear, in very few words, exactly how that fourth loss was going to be written up, and exactly what would happen to Raymond's young career if he objected to the wording. He had carried that silence for more than 30 years, the way some men carry a limp, visible only if a person knew to look for it. "I am not telling you to keep the same silence," he said. "I am telling you that I understand now, better than almost anyone alive, exactly how much it costs either way." Then he set something on the desk beside my hand, the leather cord coiled neatly around the small brass bell, and told me to keep it, that it had done what he had always hoped it would never need to do, and that some other ranger someday was going to need it more than he did anymore. Carol came to see me before she rotated out of the interior camp for the season, and she did not bring field notes. She brought a single printed photograph, the last frame recovered from the camera nearest the ridge, time-stamped 4 days after we carried Brittany down, long after the search had officially stood down. It showed the same pale, tall shape, further back in the frame than any previous image, angled slightly away from the lens, as though it had known exactly where that camera was mounted and had chosen, for reasons of its own, to be photographed anyway. Carol asked me once, quietly, whether I thought it meant the same one was still working that stretch of coast, or whether it meant there had never been only one to begin with. I did not have an answer for her. I am not sure I want one. Brittany Price left the regional clinic in Seward 11 days after we found her. Physically recovered enough to travel, though recovered is a generous word for whatever state she was actually in. She has not spoken a single word about that ridge, not to her family, not to the counselors who have tried gently for weeks now to reach whatever part of her went quiet up there. The one detail her mother shared with me hesitantly over the phone was small and strange enough that I have not been able to set it down since hearing it. Brittany cannot tolerate the sound of a small bell, wind chimes, a dog's collar. Anything with that particular bright, ordinary jingle sends her instantly and completely rigid, though she has never once been able to explain why, and her mother, understandably, has stopped asking. I have told this account to you now the way I promised at the start that I would, plainly, without the comfortable parts smoothed in and the hard parts smoothed out. And I find myself thinking, now that it is finished, about the one piece of Judith's warning I have not yet mentioned to you directly. It does not want to be seen twice by the same eyes in the same night. One look, and you are finished with each other. A second look, and it takes that as an invitation. I wonder, sometimes, what a story becomes once it leaves a single telling and turns into something told over and over, watched back, replayed at 2 in the morning by someone who tells themselves they only want to hear the ending again to be certain of what they heard the first time. I do not know if a warning carried that many times, into that many rooms, counts the same way a single glance across a ridgeline counts. I hope it does not. I have chosen to believe it does not, because I intend to keep telling these accounts, and I would like to believe that intention is a safer kind of looking than the kind Natalie almost gave into on that ridge. If you have made it this far, I only ask 2 more things of you, both small. Subscribe to Sir Bellico, to Mr. Bellico, and to Mr. Bellico, and to Mr. Geronimo if you have not already, because there will be more of these accounts and I would rather you heard them from me than found some second-hand version of them later. And if you have ever been somewhere quiet, on a trail or a porch or a road at night, and heard something behind you that you chose, wisely, not to turn around and check, tell me about it in the comments. I read every one. I always have. Some nights, out here at Holloway Point, they are the only voices I hear that I am entirely certain are human. Was late June of 1968. My dad was 12. My grandparents had moved a few months earlier from Tucson, Arizona to Concho, Arizona. Concho was very different, both in landscape and temperature. Sitting at 5,000 feet above sea level, the summer temperatures were around 70 degrees versus the hundreds in summertime Tucson. Resting at the edge of the White Mountains, the land is red, yellow, and brown sandstone cliffs and buttes against a larger ancient basalt flow ridge that lines the north from the Springville volcanic range. Well, Old Concho, as it's referred to now, sits among the high desert with large basalt ridge bordering the east and north. In the valley, a dry riverbed was dotted by large cottonwood trees. The buttes and ridges boasted large twisted cedar trees. Only about 200 people lived in Concho at the time. It's in pretty close proximity to the petrified forest. Therefore, petrified wood was found on the valley floor. There were also numerous ancient Anasazi ruins scattered along the valley. My great-uncle had moved his family to Concho as well. My grandpa had recently finished his engineering degree, and he and my great-uncle were doing highway construction all around the White Mountains. They had both purchased land in the Concho area for pretty cheap. My great-uncle had two sons who were a year older and a year younger than my dad, Tony and Sack. Tony was 13 and Sack was 11. They would spend their days exploring the surrounding landscapes, joined by my dad's American bulldog, Sarge. They had found quite a few ruins, numerous pictographs, and some old abandoned homesteads, most likely from the 19th century. Every morning they would load up their bags with canteens, bologna sandwiches, and head out into the wilderness to play and explore. My grandparents and great-aunt and uncles had only one rule that was for their children, and that was to return by sunset. As my dad recalls, on one summer morning they ended up hiking towards the edge of the giant basalt ridge to explore. After going for about a mile or so, they came upon an arroyo running adjacent to the ridge. Large black boulders and giant slabs of sandstone peppered the wash. The banks were pretty steep, but they would have to cross it if they want to explore the ridge on the other side. They made their way down slowly. Once in the arroyo, they realized that the opposite bank was too steep to climb, so they started following it west to find a better place to climb up. My dad said as soon as they got into the riverbed, he started getting an unnerving feeling like they were being watched. He said it was extremely quiet, no birds or cicadas chirping. It was hot as well, no breeze stirred the air. The further they walked down the wash, the more a sense of urgency began to build in his gut. He didn't say anything, though, for fear that his cousins would laugh at him. About a half-mile or so down the wash, it made a bend around a large volcanic boulder. Suddenly Sarge began a low growl, hair standing up on his back. This actually startled all three of the kids. Looking around, they didn't see anything, so encouraging the dog, they moved closer to the bend. Sarge stayed rooted to the spot, growling and barking. All three of the boys began to get scared. They agreed that maybe they should just turn around. They noticed that there was a spot where they could climb out of the wash. They hadn't noticed it at first, but it looked almost like a game trail. With adrenaline fueling them, they hauled ass up the side of the embankment towards the ridge, the dog darting after them. The whole time the bad feeling was growing stronger with my dad. They stopped at the top to catch their breath. Sitting against a large boulder, they took some drinks from the canteen and assured each other that Sarge probably smelled a coyote or spotted a rabbit. Here the game trail was more apparent. It had even worn into some of the volcanic and sandstone that protruded from the ground. They noticed that there were a lot of petroglyphs dotting the black rocks, geometric shapes, animal, human figures. There were so many. Finally, they found a large juniper with a trunk and ate their lunch in shade, bellies full and excitement replacing fear. They hurried along the trail as they slowly sigged and sagged the side of the basalt ridge, avoiding large areas of rockfalls. The pictographs began to change as well along the trails. Lots of spirals and horn-looking man. My dad even said it was one that looked like a UFO. Turning around a bend, the trail disappeared. Only open space of the edge of a cliff. There was nowhere else to go. The cliff dropped off to one side and a sheer cliff going up about 50 feet on the other side. My dad, he was disappointed but also a little relieved as the sun was getting further west and they were pretty far from Concho now. They could see the town in the distance as well as the holy mountain and mesas that dotted the distant Navajo res. Even though they were disappointed, they decided that it was worth looking at the view. They started making their way down the trail when they spotted an opening in the cliffside. A side canyon. They hadn't noticed it on the way up. It was behind a large twisted cedar. The tree's shadow had hidden it. It looked almost like there was another trail going into the divide. The opening was about 4 feet wide. Looking at it, that unnerving feeling returned to my dad. His stomach dropped and he felt like it was twisting in knots. The hair on the back neck stood up. Tony suggested that they should detour and check it out. My dad protested, saying that they needed to get back. Zach stayed silent. He looked as scared as my dad felt. Tony laughed when looking at them and called them both sissies. He said if they didn't want to go, it was fine, that they could wait there for him and be babies if they wanted. That's when Sarge ran down the trail and was out of sight. My dad whistled for him, but he didn't return. Zach decided he would follow Tony, so my dad stayed behind while they entered the narrow black-walled canyon. When they moved out of my dad's field of vision, the wind picked up, blowing through the canyon and trees, making a creepy sound. It was quiet except the wind, and my dad thought he heard faint voices on the air. He shivered, the ominous feeling growing stronger. 10 minutes passed, then 20, and still Tony and Zach had not returned. A large cloud had covered the sun, and drops of rain began to fall. My dad moved under the cedar to get out of the light rain that began to fall. He sat on a rock and began to shiver. Suddenly, something grabbed his shoulder. He jumped about 3 feet and screamed. Then he heard laughing. It was Tony and Zach. They looked extremely excited. "Luke, you'll never believe what we found," they said. "We found some Indian steps and they lead to a cave. They begged my dad to come see." It wasn't far, only about 10 minutes into the canyon. My dad ended up following them, knowing they weren't going to agree to go home until they showed them. Plus, he felt a little braver and more intrigued now. Sure enough, around a bend and about 20 yards into the canyon was more wide, about 20 to 30 feet across, and there were indeed foot and handholds carved into the rock wall. My dad had seen steps like them before, when his parents had taken him to Chaco Canyon National Park. They were smaller than the ones in Chaco and only went up about 20 feet to the darkened mouth of a small cave. He shivered from excitement or fear, he wasn't sure. From the bottom of the canyon there was no way of telling how large the cave was. They dropped their packs and decided to use the foot and handholds to climb up to the cave against my dad's better judgment. The rain had stopped, but they slowly and carefully made their way because the rock had become slick. It took about 10 minutes to ascend. My dad called for Sarge from the top again, and the dog still hadn't returned. The cave was much larger and deeper than they expected, and the entrance was decorated with hundreds of petroglyphs. The light didn't penetrate very far in, but they could see light in the distance from an opening in the roof, so they entered. Light adjusting to the dark, they started to notice that the ground was covered with objects. What looked like rocks and debris now revealed itself to be pots. Beautiful painted pots of all shapes and sizes, black on white painted with geometric patterns. And animals, red pots and even some yellow ones, large pots holding dry corn and crusty squash and beans. There were also pots filled with arrowheads and beads. They even found some instruments like drums and flutes. They didn't touch anything and kept walking deeper into the cave. They looked around in shock and in awe. They had just discovered something big, something very big. They moved now towards the second bit of light streaming in from a crack in the roof. The cave was littered with all sorts of artifacts, stone axes, pots of all shapes, colors and sizes. As they passed under the crack, they noticed now that there were objects and alcoves in the wall. My dad moved closer to one and his blood froze. He was looking at a human body. It was decayed skin and hair clinging to patches and its mouth open and would look like a silent scream. He took a leap back. Tony and Zach also froze. The walls were lined with alcoves filled with dressed bodies, lining the walls as far as they could see into the darkness. Suddenly, an ominous and horrendous screech broke the silence of the cave. All three boys jumped, and my dad, looking in the direction from where the sound came, saw two red and glowing eyes. He froze, locked in place by those glowing red eyes. Suddenly the cave was washed over with the stench of decay and death. The eyes began to move towards the boys slowly. Another hideous growl, screech jolted them from being petrified in place. The eyes were moving fast now, right towards them, and they heard what sounded like running footsteps. They turned and tore out of the cave as fast as they could. They ran as fast as their legs could carry them in a blind panic. The entrance to the cave was maybe 30 yards away. My dad looked back against his better judgment and saw a man on all fours, or a giant coyote. He can't be sure. He pushed himself faster, screaming for the others to also run faster. They reached the edge of the cave, having to turn around to scrabble back down the foot and handholds. Zach got there first and began descending as fast as he could. Tony was next. His face turned into a wash of horror as he went down. My dad's heart was hammering into his brain by now. He turned and saw the eyes only about 20 feet from him. The stench of decay was overpowering. It made his stomach turn. As fast as he could, he placed his feet in the first set of footholds and started clambering down the rock face. He could hear the creature's breath now and even feel it. He refused to look up as he was going down, trying to concentrate on the hand and footholds. He heard Tony scream from below him and looked to see Tony lose his hold and slip about 5 feet from the bottom. He landed on his side and began to scream with pain. My dad slowed himself a bit, still not daring to look back up. After what seemed like an eternity, he leaped from the cliffside down the last 2 feet. Zach was helping Tony to his feet, and Tony was frozen looking at the cave and ancient staircase, all the color gone from his face. My dad was in full panic and, not looking, grabbed Tony and helped Zach drag him away. They flew down the little canyon. Finally, before they passed the turn, my dad looked back to see the red eyes watching them from the darkness. Another screech rang from the cave. And at that moment, Sarge in the full run came from around the bend, growling and barking. He ran to the foot and handhold staircase and bellow up that cave, the hair on his back standing straight up, snarling and growling. The sounds of the dog filled the canyon. As my dad turned the corner, he saw those red eyes retreat back into the cave. They emerged from the small canyon and stopped briefly to catch their breath. The sounds of Sarge barking and growling echoing down the canyon. Tony at this point was now crying, his face washed with pain. His arm, he said, he thinks he broke it. Zach was silent. My dad was then asking Tony if he could make it home. Tony responded, he sure as hell wasn't staying anywhere near whatever that was. Suddenly, a shrill cry came from the canyon. It was a dog in pain. Sarge, my dad cried, but Tony and Zach had started running down the trail. My dad screamed again, tears coming from his eyes. There was no response. It was quiet. My dad thinks he hears something. He looks up to the canyon entrance. It sounds like drums. My dad sits there confused. Drums? What the hell? Is he losing his mind? The drums are getting loud. Is this in his mind? Where is Sarge? He can't leave him. My dad sees Zach tearing back up the trail. Luke, we have to go. The drums are louder now, and he can hear faint chanting. Zach grabs my dad and jerks him to his feet. Don't you hear that? He screams and shakes my dad. We have to run, now. My dad is woken from his grief as fear washes over him again. He runs down the trail with Zach. Tony is waiting at the edge of the arroyo, waiting for them. The wash is now running, about 6 inches deep. They notice for the first time that a large thunderhead has developed to the south. A huge, large black storm, dominating the southern horizon, lightning flashing in the distance. A new source of danger crosses my dad's mind. He tells Tony and Zach they need to cross the arroyo as fast as possible. If it floods, they will be stuck on the side with the basalt ridge with whatever that thing was. They make their way down carefully and slowly. Tony is having a hard time because of his injured arm. They now start hearing thunder rolling across the air and the wind has increased. My dad is keeping a close eye on the creek, which has only risen a couple of more inches. They make all the way down and across the creek. The place where they crossed is only 30 yards or so ahead, so they scrabble their way towards it. The water starts rising now. At an alarming rate, they start going as fast as their legs will carry them. They're exhausted, but keep pushing on. Suddenly, my dad, who is in the rear, starts to hear loud splashing coming from behind them. His heart drops. It followed them. It's getting closer. He closes his eyes, bracing for impact. That's when he feels something lick the back of his swinging hand. He turns, bracing for impact, and sees Sarge. Joy fills my dad. He bends down and gives Sarge a quick hug as the dog runs past, and the dog bounds after Tony and Zach as they climb out of the arroyo. My dad runs and begins to climb. When he's almost to the top, he hears crashing and loud snapping coming from the arroyo. Making it to the top, he sees a wave of brown debris-filled water crash through the wash. He falls to his butt and watches as the flash flood fills the little canyon. Tony and Zach are lying on the ground, gasping for air. My dad tries to catch his breath. He feels dizzy. He feels tears welling up, and Sarge comes and licks his face. My dad sees that Sarge is covered with blood. He looks over the dog and finds several slash wounds on his back. His ear is also torn. They don't look too deep, but he can't be sure. Zach is the first to speak. He is asking what it was, but no one responds. Tony's arm is beginning to swell pretty badly, and it's only a few hours till dusk. They're all thirsty and realize in their panic they left their packs in the small canyon, along with their canteens. They are no longer in a hurry. They are exhausted. They drink some rainwater that has pooled in one of the large sandstone boulders. They figure whatever that thing was, it's not going to be getting across the arroyo for a few hours. So they slowly make their way back to Concho as the thunderhead to the south continues to fill the landscape. The 3 boys and Sarge make it home around 8. The sun has set and my grandparents and great-uncle and aunt are worried sick. They are relieved and angry until they see the condition of the trio and the dog. The boys tell them about their horrendous tale and Tony's parents rush Tony to the nearest doctor. That night my dad sleeps with Sarge at the end of his bed. Despite him being extremely exhausted, he is plagued with nightmares, one that he speaks about all the time. It's especially terrifying, where he sees the red eyes looking in through his window. When he wakes up, though, in the morning, his curtains are closed. The rain continued for 2 or 3 days. The boys don't leave their homes, still terrified of what happened. My grandpa and great-uncle are convinced what the boys encounter was a mountain lion, but they are intrigued by the story of the cave they found. A few days later, when the weather is clear, they tell the boys they want to see the cave. They make the journey faster this time, using my great-uncle's Jeep. My grandpa and great-uncle also bring along a couple of shotguns and rifles, in case this lion is still in the cave. The boys show them the arroyo, which has been filled with new boulders and broken trees from the flooding. They find the trail and start making their way up. My grandpa on the front and great-uncle taking the rear. They find the boys' packs caught in a cedar bush. They have been shredded. My grandpa figures they must have been caught by another flood, and they ended up in the trees. They finally make it to the little hidden canyon, which has been blocked by a juniper that washed down during the rain. My grandpa and great-uncle get the log out of the way, and they go to the canyon to the Indian staircase. When they look up, though, they can make out the darkness of the cave. The water washed away all signs of the boys' previous passage. My grandpa figures maybe at this time of day, the cave is more illuminated, so he and my great-uncle climb up the foot and handholds to the top. The boys wait at the bottom, having no desire to go back up there again. It's only my dad and Zach. Tony, with his broken arm, stay home. My grandpa calls down for them to climb up. They do as they are told and climb up. When my dad reaches the top, he is stunned. The cave is gone. It's only a 20-foot rock alcove next to a black basalt cliff covered with petroglyphs. He's confused, looks around. He goes over to the wall looking for cracks and sees nothing. My grandpa and great-uncle end up questioning the boys. Were they making up stories? No, they weren't. Something attacked Sarge and the boys hadn't made up being that scared. The dads aren't mad. It's a neat area. Maybe some other weekend they will look for the cave again. My dad and Zach know that this is where the cave was. There's no doubt in their minds. They found their packs and even passed by the UFO petroglyph. But they can't convince the adults, so they make their way to the Jeep that is parked on the far bank of the arroyo. As they load up, sun sinking low in the western sky. My dad looks back at the black basalt ridge, wondering if maybe it was all just a dream, but something in the shadow of a cliff catches his eye. He squints against the sun and sees two red shining eyes. Looking back at him, his blood goes cold. He turns around as the Jeep pulls away. My grandparents only stayed in Concho for another few months. As soon as my grandpa finished the highway project, he got a job offer in the U.S. Virgin Islands. My dad said after that encounter he had nightmares every night and would swear that at night he would see the red eyes outside of the house until they finally moved from Concho. After he moved, he never had a nightmare about the eyes again. But it wasn't his last encounter with the red-eyed creature. He would see it again when he became an adult. But that is a story for another time. Ziz nali warn jami toins, zapter mi toins, zapter nuns nani toins, of venami toins, zapter nuns nani 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 toins, zapter nuns. They're evil. The witches of the Navajo Nation, powerful witches. They go through the training that medicine men do, except that they practice bad medicine. They are humans, so their exact motives are different. Well, they vary, just like with all humans. Maybe they're looking for vengeance. Maybe they're just crazy, greedy. However, majority of them are tricksters, causing fear. They'll fuck up your life. They'll kidnap you, kill you, and then do stuff to your body. They cause sickness and cast curses by using bad medicine. I know you've spoken on numerous stories about these things and the different ceremonies needed, one of them being called the blessing way. These witches pervert the traditional way and perform their own ceremonies as well. They call it the witching way. I'm sure you heard that knowing who they are or saying their name will kill them. But I also heard stories that if you see their human face, it will kill them, which is why they shapeshift and wear pelts. And the only way to get rid of one of these witches is by having a medicine man conduct a blessing way ceremony. Who am I? Well, my name is Alex. It's a generic white boy name, I'm aware. But I was actually born and raised in a small town called Chinle. Chinle is deep in the mountains of the Northeast Navajo Nation in the northeast corner of Arizona. We have a school, all the basics to survive, you can say. For those who aren't familiar, you have two parts of the town, one on each side, with nothing but dirt roads in between. While many Arizona small towns have an American feel, this cannot be said for any town on the rest. The reservation, including Chinle, was filled with poverty, alcoholism, abuse, and social isolation. It's the closest you can get to hell within the U.S. So with all this being said, maybe that's why you won't find it strange that after buying vodka from a friend at the age of 16, I was walking back home. My father was abusive, my mom was dead. I had no real reason to return home for the night. Nor did my father have a reason to care if I returned. If anything, he made it feel like I was a burden to him. So I had a bottle of vodka in one hand and a gun in the pocket of my jacket, in case some shit went down, as it tends to on the rest. I remember it was sometime in March at night. The temperature was below freezing. A light dusting of snow was falling from the pitch-dark night sky. That's the one benefit of the Navajo nations. Clear night skies, but that's pretty much it. Instead of taking one of the main roads that everyone drove through, I chose to go around the long way, basically, where nobody ever drove. Now, why did I do that? Well, imagine a young teenager walking in the middle of the night with a bottle of alcohol. Mind you, it was in a bag, but still, you didn't want to be caught, or even worse, end up being robbed. I was walking along a two-lane road when I heard some rustling noises in the bushes to the left, and I spotted a coyote. I shrugged it off. I had dozens of encounters with coyotes in my life. I had no reason to fear it. I took another swig of vodka and continued walking. That's when the wind picked up. Something felt deeply ominous in a scary way. I looked over to my left again. The coyote, which must have been 25 yards from me prior, was now about 10 yards away from me and slowly walking towards me. I didn't panic, trying to feel tough, but I would be lying if I said I didn't have a small fear at this point. 30 seconds later, I'm still walking down the road. The coyote is within about 20 feet of me. It just seemed like it was just following me, being curious, almost like if I had a nice slab of steak in my back pocket. I kept an eye on the coyote, but I started growing deeply concerned. The wind started picking up and the coyote got closer. I considered the options that I had and realized that I could get fucked over if I didn't act soon. Seeing that I was the track star of Chinle High School, well, before I was expelled, I bolted, I sprinted, I ran. I looked back and the coyote remained walking as if he didn't want to bother some drunken teenager running through the desert. That's when the coyote picked up his pace and within seconds was just a few feet behind me. As I looked back, I swore its eyes were yellow. I had never seen anything like this in my life. Scared, I threw the bottle of vodka towards it, hoping it would scare it away. To my surprise, I actually ended up hitting it. Not that I was aiming for it, but I guess someone or something was looking out for me that night. Not only did I hit the coyote, the bottle smashed across its head when it came no more than a foot behind me. While the coyote stopped and started making all sorts of weird noises, I wasn't fucking around. I continued running. I stopped for a second and looked back. The glass was lodged within the coyote's head. I looked back and saw a pool of blood forming on the icy road. I looked in front of me, running, thinking how I ended up in this situation. Well, I know exactly how I ended up in this situation, but it wouldn't count if you blame yourself. I looked back again, and then ahead of me I looked back and did a double take. The coyote no longer had a glass on its head and it was now running full force towards me. So I did something that is completely illegal on the rest. Something worse than bootlegging alcohol at the age of 16. I pulled out my grandfather's old pistol I carried and fired a shot. I missed, I tried again, I missed again. The coyote is now again a few feet behind me and it seems to be snarling something, as if it's trying to communicate. I fired a third shot. This time I landed on the coyote's head again, and you better fucking believe I didn't stop to celebrate. I had seen what this thing was capable of. I dropped my pistol, not sure how or why, but I dropped it and ran and didn't even look behind me this time. Then I saw the headlights. I stood in the middle of the road, motioning towards the car, attempting to stop him. Most Navajo people don't pick up hitchhikers for safety reasons, so I was going to force this guy to let me in by stopping in the middle of the road. Within 10 seconds, the man driving the vehicle came to a stop, almost slipping on the black ice. I stood by the passenger door and he rolled down his window. "Let me in. A fucking coyote is chasing me. I'm not a criminal. Please, sir." He simply nodded his head and he let me inside the vehicle. He must have been drunk, I figure. As I got in and buckled my seatbelt, I looked at the rearview mirror of the car and that's when I saw it. The coyote was running behind us, easily going about 30 miles per hour, maybe more. The man took notice of this and took off. "Hey kid, is this thing chasing you?" he said in a slur. That's when it hit me. The faster it ran, I began to see it more, a pail on its head. This thing was now on its hind legs. The old man then looked at me and locked eyes with me. "Don't look at it. Stop making eye contact with it," he said calmly. "That's a Navajo witch. I will drive fast now, okay?" he said. We started going at 60 and it followed and it was still behind us. 65, 70 and it was still keeping up. Once we got to about 80 and its beat-up Toyota, the thing was no longer visible in the mirror. The old man then looked at me and said, "You know, if that thing wanted to get you, it would have. It was just playing with you." I looked at him confused and he just chuckled in a drunken fashion and said, "I know why you're walking around here at night. Get out of my car at the next stop and I don't ever want to see you again." About 10 minutes passed and we didn't say anything. We got to an intersection and the old man looked at me and said, "This is where you get off." I thanked the old man and he just took off. After that night, everything changed for me. I ended up learning about these things. I kinda knew about them a little bit, but I never really did believe in anything until this night. I stopped drinking, I ended up going back to school, and my life did change for the better. Of course, I still had issues and struggles with other things, but I learned a lesson that night, and I hope that you don't gotta go through something like this to believe in these things or to turn your life around.
Nan han han.
My sister is a wildlife major and she sent the following story to me because she found it so strange. She said she found it from a now deleted post from an archived wildlife group, November 19th. This is completely random and I'm not sure if this is the right place for my question, but here it goes. I was driving home from my girlfriend's house the other night. We hang out like every day, always with either one of us driving to the other's house and spending the entire day there until after 10 or 11 p.m. Anyways, when I was driving back, I say it was a quarter after 11, but maybe later. I was going past the big field and I noticed a deer. We live in West Virginia, so we see deer all the time and it takes a miracle not to hit one every season. I always pay attention to the deer when I spot them to make sure they're not going to run out in front of me. But this deer caught my attention before I was even that close to him. He was moving his head back and forth really fast. I noticed the motion of his eyes in my headlights and he was standing maybe 15 feet from the road. Now it wasn't a normal head bucking or anything like that. I know next to nothing about deer despite the area that I live in, but I have seen them dip their head and stuff when you get close to them. But this wasn't that. I try to describe the motion as best as I can, maybe you can picture it. He was rocking his head from side to side, almost as if he could picture someone listening to music and bebopping their head from shoulder to shoulder, except that this was way more dramatic. It was really fast. He was forcing his head from side to side every time he would go all the way past the 90-degree head tilt, almost like he was trying to force his head upside down. I can describe this in such detail because it surprised me so much that I slowed down as I passed him. I noticed that the speed didn't seem to change at all, and he didn't even stop doing the head rocking. It was just continuously going back and forth, almost as fast as an excited dog wagging its tail. It looked violent and like painful. When I went right past it, I tried to look at the deer's face. He wasn't looking at me or my car in the way that they normally stare. He was looking sideways. His eyes were wide. I never really spent time examining the appearance of a deer's facial features. Anyways, I guess I'm asking if this is normal for deer to do. Maybe it's just because it was so late at night and dark on the road, but to be honest, I found it really strange. Truthfully, it creeped me out. I couldn't stop thinking about it. As I lay down in bed, I couldn't even go to sleep because the picture of the deer moving its head was stuck in my mind, which is why I'm actually writing this. I couldn't find anything on the internet, so I need to ask if this is just really weird behavior that they do. Part of me feels like I should have stopped my car and checked on him. Part of me wants to go back and look for him. I'ma go past that field again tomorrow when I go to my girlfriend's again. But I'm not sure if I should stop. Maybe if somebody can just tell me if this is normal, or if it's dangerous for me to go look for him. Thanks, your wildlife investigator. November 21st. First of all, thank you everyone for your responses. I'm not so sure exactly what kind of deer it is for those that are asking. So against a lot of your suggestions that it could have rabies or something, I chose to just quickly stop at the field on my way over yesterday, right around the spot where I'm pretty sure that I saw it. I did find some blood and some fur. Don't worry, I didn't touch the blood. But there was enough blood that I could see pretty much a trail that went towards the woods on the other side of the field. My girlfriend would kill me if I was late, so I had to head to her house before lunch, but I stopped again quickly on my way back at night. It was after 11 again and I brought a flashlight. I followed the blood trail to the edge of the woods. I was really surprised by the amount of blood. I was actually wondering if maybe he got hit by a car and survived, or if he really did have rabies and attacked something else. Long story short, I was too scared to go into the woods at night. My girlfriend is having a girls' day tomorrow, so I'm tempted to use my free time to go look in the woods during the day. Then again, I might just sleep. Thanks, your wildlife investigator. November 22nd. Alright y'all, I was lazy. I didn't go back into the woods, however. Many of you are now invested in this adventure, which has made me also more invested. I actually named the deer Charlie, and I'm determined to find out what happened to him. Also, I'm 20 years old, since you all been asking. One of you even said that you want to know how old I am, so you know how tragic it would be if I died in the woods. So thank you for that. I'm going on Tuesday afternoon. I got off work and the missus didn't. I am taking bug spray, boots, a hiking stick, and granola bars. And I'm not going to lie, this does seem a bit dramatic, but it's all for Charlie. Thanks, your wildlife investigator. November 24th. Charlie's dead. When I wrote the last post, I was excited and interested, but now I'm just sad. I guess with the blood and all, I should have assumed that Charlie didn't make it, but I can confirm that now. At least I'm assuming it's Charlie's based on the blood trail. The worst part is that Charlie was eviscerated while he was still in one piece. His neck and head were bent backwards over his body. His neck was ripped open, revealing a ton of blood and skin and fur and his spine and bones. Not a genius, but what I think is most weird is that if he was injured to his neck like this by a car, how on earth could he have walked all the way to this place in the woods? The woods he went into were at least 50 yards from where he was standing, and I walked another 5 minutes into the woods to find his body. Can a deer survive and run a football field with their head hanging off like a chicken? I can't help thinking about the thing he was doing when I first saw him, the head rocking back and forth. This seems impossible, but his body almost looked like he had been doing the rocking so hard that he split open his own neck and died on the spot. James, your wildlife investigator. November 30th. Thanks for all the responses and all the RIPs for Charlie. Seems like none of you have an idea what could have happened, aside from my guesses. I guess I'll check back on this thread here and there to see if anybody has anything to add, but if not, I guess it's farewell for now. James, your wildlife investigator. December 8th. It happened again. This time I was driving to my girlfriend's house in broad daylight, just across from the spot in the woods where Charlie was, but on the opposite side of the road. I saw a rabbit, sitting still, swinging its head back and forth in nearly the same manner. I quickly pulled over and got out of the car. I tried to slowly go towards it. I noticed that the swinging was very fast again and violent in the same way that the deer's had been. Even though the bunny's neck was short and he couldn't swing his head quite as far, I did see that he was already bleeding. I noticed it on his right side, just between his shoulder and neck. I got within about 3 feet of him before he took off across the road onto the field and onto the woods in the exact spot where Charity's blood trail had led to. I'm writing this from my girlfriend's house. I'm too anxious to wait. I'm going to go back in tonight on my way home. James, your wildlife investigator. December 9th. After this, I'm not sure if this thread is the right place for this adventure at all. I pulled over in the same spot as before. I checked the time. It was 11 p.m. last night when I left my car. I took my flashlight and headed back into the woods, in the same slightly stomped out trail from my previous visit. Charlie's dried blood was still there. After a few minutes of jogging, Charlie's blood was still in the same place. I looked around the area. It was nothing but dense woods, so I decided to continue walking in the same direction Charlie had been going. I walked into the woods for another 10 minutes or so, and I was about to give up when I saw a movement above me. I shined my light up and there was a robin sitting on a branch. It was looking directly in the direction I was walking, not at me, and it was swinging its head back and forth in the same way. The movement looked even more scary in a bird. It was sudden, rapid flutters of its tiny head from left to right and back again. I had to stand on my toes and wiggle my flashlight less than a foot below the bird to get it to fly away. It darted straight towards the woods in the direction I was facing and that I had been walking. I went after it, not sure how long I ran for, but I kept my light ahead and was able to get glimpses of the bird and keep up with it. Eventually, it took me down a very steep hill where I fell and slid sideways into a small clearing. It was the strangest thing I had ever seen in my life. The first thing I noticed was that there were animals all around me. They were all dead and all in the same way as Charlie. There must have been dozens. Birds, squirrels, chipmunks, rabbits. All of them were lying in or around the clearing, with their heads snapped back towards their bodies and the insides of their necks on display, and even what looked to be a cat. As I shined my light around, I noticed the second thing, the horrible smell. I had smelled dead animals before, but never so many. It was completely unbearable. I pulled my hood up and sit my winter jacket tight all the way over my nose. I was freaked out. I could hear my heart beating and I felt like I was hyperventilating, and even what looked to be a cat. I vomited. I stumbled just a bit and I noticed how the dead animals on the ground just piled up, moving towards a single direction. As I stepped that way, I pointed my light ahead. A few yards away, I noticed it. There was an outcrop in a rock between two trees. Underneath the outcrop was a round opening. When I shined my light into it, it didn't reveal an end, but only the sides of the rock. It must have been a pretty deep cave. On each side of it, I noticed more animal bodies, until my light came across something bright blue. I walked over and saw it was a bag, one of those little sacks like you get from going to a summer camp or on a college orientation trip. As I picked it up, I heard the sound of some pretty heavy rustling nearby, and that was too much for me. I took off with the back-end flashlight up to steep bank as fast as I could. On my way out, I saw dead deer, and I think I even saw some dead coyotes that I had not seen on the run-in. It took me a while, but my adrenaline was pumping, and I eventually burst out of the woods right onto the road. I had come out about a half-mile up the road from where I parked my car by the field. I ran back to my car, and I didn't see or hear anything else. When I got home and felt somewhat safe inside, I opened up the bag. There were writing utensils, some bookmarks, and a gray water bottle. Mainly there was a little sketchbook. I flipped through it, and there were mostly some random drawings. Not very good, but good enough that I could tell the person liked drawing in their spare time. It was normal stuff, characters and scenery and such. That's until I got to the last page. There was a very creepy drawing that I'm going to try my best to describe. It was a large, somewhat human-looking shape. It had white legs and feet, a triangular torso, and outstretching arms. There were only 3 finger shapes on the hands, and they looked long, like full carrots drooping straight down from the ends of the arms. This thing had what almost looked to be wings, except that they came out of its back almost at the bottom, right above the legs, and dropped straight down as low as its ankles. Finally, in place of its head, there was a huge hollow circle 3 times larger than you would expect the head to have been based on the body proportions. The outside edges of the entire circle was littered with a bunch of smaller circles and dots. It just looked very bizarre. Aside from the difference in style, it was drawn in much more poor quality than the rest of the pictures in the book. It looked like it was almost scribbled in with an unsharpened pencil. There were smudges and wet spots all over the page. And last, down at the bottom of the page were some really sloppy scribbles. They looked like they read, Zeki, 1:18. It ease me, I must see. Does anyone have any idea what all this could be? I have no words and no thoughts. I didn't sleep at all last night. I'm actually pretty terrified. I call the police, a game warden. This is literally all I can think about. I don't know if this is the best idea, but I want to go back to see the cave in the daytime. I'll take my dad's 12 gauge in case I do run into an animal or something that's been doing this. It must be terrifying. After I go, I'll call the game people to come get these dead animals. I'll provide an update tomorrow. James, your wildlife investigator. My sister said this is where the story finished. A lot of people were asking for updates in the group, but he never gave any. They never found any reports of a missing person named James. One person did post that they found somebody named Daniel Shinley, whose middle name was apparently James, and he was 20 years old and reported missing in Maryland 2 weeks after the last update of James. Does anybody else have any info on this?
What noneste dwarf?
I was about 10 or 11 years old when I first encountered a skinwalker. My family always has a peyote meeting on Christmas and New Year's. This happened on New Year's. The whole family was together and staying at our house for the blessing. All the kids, including myself, were in the hogan sleeping while the adults were out in the teepee praying. From what we heard later, one of the men saw something outside the teepee and told the chief. The chief then told my uncle. Together, my uncle, some of the men, and my older brothers armed themselves and went out into the dark to investigate. The whole gun is in the small valley within the highest elevations of the rest. At this time, I'm in bed and sleeping. I jump up at the sound of a gun going off. All hunting and shooting is frowned upon during the blessing ceremony. It was my older brother shooting his hunting rifle. My cousins, too, are waking up with all the commotion. When I do sit up, I see my sister is there in the room with us. She is burning cedar and saying a prayer. Meanwhile, all the men are outside, about a half a mile from the hogan, chasing and shooting at something moving through the arroyo. According to them, they shot at it more than a dozen times and they were for sure that they hit it more than once. Nevertheless, it would just duck down out of sight for a moment or two and get back up and move again. My father said that he loaded his gun with bullets rubbed with white ash and that when he started shooting with those, the creature sensed it and then it ran out of the valley. Some people ask what can be done to protect yourself from a skinwalker. Well, for one, get inside your home. There's only one thing that happens if a skinwalker starts to follow you. You must have had some sort of interaction with them at some time prior, although it must have not been in the form of the skinwalker. Cedar ash around the house, a prayer, and a visit to the medicine man are often required to find out the skinwalker's intentions. Dogs are a good thing to keep around. If something is near, they bark or yell. But nothing will protect you from the frozen fear they cause, or even the stress that is suffered afterwards. Encounters usually happen either because of jealousy from another family or even another person and possibly even hate. A long time ago, it was believed that skinwalkers were of good intention, serving more as protectors or avengers. I was told this by some medicine man as a young child growing up, but it's the bad ones that retain the knowledge of becoming one. Always keep a sharp eye on family members who you may have a disagreement with, or even with old friends who you had a falling out with. Say you haven't seen this person for a while, family or friend, and suddenly he or she comes back into your life. It may be a sign that they are not who they appear to be, and maybe they have not come for the reason they say. My grandfather was a badass. He was born in Alberta in the early 30s and he raised his 3 brothers on arrest from the time that he was 9 years old. His parents had left for British Columbia with their only daughter, promising to come back, but none of the boys ever saw them again. To make ends meet, he learned carpentry and worked in labor, and he bare-knuckle boxed against older men for extra cash. He learned how to track and go hunting, and he would always come home with something to eat when there wasn't much work. However, when he was 14, he put the second oldest brother in charge of the household and left the rest in search of his parents and a better life. This was the last time that he saw any of his family members. He spent several months riding through everywhere and he eventually made his way to Vancouver, the last whereabouts of his parents and sister, and he started working in the mill. At 17, he met the woman who would become my grandmother and the two eventually married, which led to him giving up his search for his family. They bought some land, and he spent his free time building several houses, which still stand today. One of those sat on the land that he bought with my grandmother, which included acres of wooded area. On his land, my grandparents kept horses, dogs, and small farm animals for eggs and meat. My aunt was then born in early 50s, and then my brother came along right before the end of the decade. As far as I heard, nothing bad or strange really happened until my mom found an old Ouija board and played with it by herself. I don't know if that actually has anything to do with the following events. My mom was around 8 when she was riding the horse through the wooded part of their land when the horse just stopped dead in its tracks. My mom tried to spray it on, but it was frozen in fear, and all of a sudden she started smelling something awful, rotting garbage and rotting meat. She pulled back the reins of the horse and it quickly turned and took off back towards the house, almost knocking her off its back several times along the way. Afterwards, the horse was never the same. She went near it, would try to kick her, and if she got on it, it would fall backwards, trying to crush her beneath. At one point, it seemed to be back to its old self again, letting her climb onto it, but when she did, it ran towards the road and stopped again, bucking her into the path of a car. My grandpa saw it happen and he put a shotgun up to its head, but the horse didn't react and just kept breathing and staring straight ahead. My mother barely missed being ran over by a car that saw the horse coming and was able to swerve out the way. My grandmother begged my grandfather not to shoot the horse. He finally decided to give it away when my mom was in ready battle to be injured. The same horse fell on the next person's ride, breaking her collarbone, and from what I heard, that girl's father did what my grandpa should have done the first time. After that, animals started going missing and one of the hunting dogs was attacked by something at night. It did survive, but the poor dog was very badly injured. My grandpa set out some traps and stayed above the barn with a shotgun and rifle beside him. He slept out there for a few nights. He figured it was foxes or maybe coyotes, wolves, or even a desperate bear, which is what he connected to the smell in the woods. He figured it was the same reason that one horse had lost its mind, but nothing came the entire time he slept out there. And eventually he figured it had moved on to easier prey or maybe even died. The day after he stopped sleeping in the barn, my mom was out near the tree line playing with the injured dog as it was healing, and out of nowhere the dog started sniffing the air. It then put itself in between my mom and the trees, growling and barking. My grandpa then heard the noise and came out. Then he stopped in his tracks. He called back to my grandmother to bring him his rifle and then whistled for the dogs. My grandma came out and then asked what was going on as the dogs all started to react just like the first one. My grandfather pointed to one of the treetops which looked longer and thicker than those around it, but it was slightly moving. There was something up there. When Grandpa would later retell the story, he said that whatever it was must have been at least 6 feet tall or maybe a good bit taller. He took aim and then he fired, just as he saw something up there. Whatever it was watching them. But he beat it to the punch. It was a kill shot, directly in the chest with a high-caliber rifle, and he instantly started running towards it, with all of the dogs following behind him. As this thing fell to the ground, you could hear the tree branches breaking. When he reached the impact point, he raised his rifle again, and he commanded the dogs to move forward to flesh it out. But they all just stood in the same spot and kept spinning around, trying to catch a scent that seems to have disappeared. A pile of broken branches lay in the obvious landing spot. But beyond that, there was no proof that anything had happened. No body, no blood, not even a trail. It had disappeared or gone straight back up the way it came. He searched those woods for days but never found a sign of what that thing was, and they never saw it or experienced issues with the animals after that. A few decades later, when he was dying, he kept talking about how he saw something. He said it was coming back for him. Never seen that man scared of anything in my whole life, but there was actual panic and fear in his own voice. A few nights before he died, he had already been too weak to stand on his own for several days, and my grandmother awoke to the sound of a gunshot. She ran outside, fearing the worst, and saw my grandpa lowering his rifle, staring at something out in the distance. She took the gun away, and also helped him back inside, and that was it. I'm not sure if whatever it was actually did come back for him, or if it was just an old memory, but I do like to think that he went out with a final fuck you to the thing that tried to bother his family all those years ago. Keep an eye out on those treetops. 2 weeks ago, I went back to the rest to be with my family, while a medicine man was at our house performing a ceremony to get rid of an evil presence. It appeared someone had entered the home while my parents were away for a few days. Dirt from the cemetery was sprinkled throughout the house, and dark symbols were etched into the cedar shake on the side of the house. One was the symbol for a coyote tracks, which stands for trickster, and other was a snake. A few days later, my mother was almost bitten by a rattlesnake that found its way into the basket holding the laundry, which she had said she just removed from the clothesline outside. My sister that same day was then thrown from her horse when it was startled by another snake. She said it appeared out of nowhere. She wasn't seriously hurt. But that night my father came out of the house to find the pair of coyotes had gotten into the sheep corral. He chased them away before they could do any damage. He says the coyotes never came so close to the house. The prayer ceremony lasted about 2 hours. It didn't do me any good. As soon as I got into the county road, the check engine light came on. I was driving a rental car with less than 2,000 miles. I ignored it, and I kept on driving. As I left the state back into New Mexico, a truck driving beside me blew a tire, almost swerving into me. Less than 15 minutes later, as we were coming up this curve on the road, there was a van up ahead of me and in the lane to the right. It lost one of the ladders it had on top. It flew off and hit the pavement right in front of me, and then it bounced over the hood of my car and off to the shoulder. How it didn't come through the windshield, I'll never know. It happened so fast, I never had the chance to move. Later that night, my father called me. He said that he and the medicine man went out to the cemetery and dug up a spot in front of my grandmother's headstone. She did die years ago. It seems like someone had buried the bones of a coyote there to put a curse on our family. The shore station sat on the edge of Lake Tautan, a body of water my father was a forest engineer. Basically, he studied how to manage the trees that need to be cut, how to repopulate certain areas. When he was in college, he liked to do alpinism with other people. He had been doing it since he was 15. At this point, he was around 22 or 23. He had a lot of experience by this time. So now he was some sort of squad leader in one of the big hiking groups. They traveled for days. They would also train along the way. They would meet the squad and plan for the whole week, with tents and food and all of the equipment. The backpacks weighed around 170 pounds. It's kinda like carrying a whole other person on your back. So they started hiking. First they went completely unnoticed. The second day, they made it through some cliffs. A big storm was coming in. They could see it from the black clouds. They decided to camp out. The storm continued for 2 whole days. The food had to be rationed. They decided it was good to go and restarted the path. They got a call on the radio they had. It was the forest rangers. They do rescuing when someone gets lost. Basically, they were telling them to come back as fast as they could. No sleep if needed. My father asked why. Apparently 2 girls were hiking by themselves and they got into some real trouble. One of them was missing and the other was possibly dead. The whole group was a little freaked out about the whole thing, but they made it back and we would be close to 24 hours of non-stop walking and descending cliffs. When they made it back, one of the search parties was already out, but the rangers were going to send another group as well, and they ended up volunteering to go with them. They slept for 3 hours before the search began. My father said he just laid down their sleeping bags in the storage hut of the ranger outpost. They could hear everything being spoken over the radio. It was crazy. What happened is that the first ranger rescue party was following a trail. They came across something that looked like a human barefoot pram. But it was massive, over a size 18. And it went deep into the snow and mud. We followed it, but it went very fast and through rough terrain where you would need lots of equipment to climb. We barely slept. The first search party came back and met with them and told them everything they saw. Second search party that one of my dad was going to be in said that they were going to go towards the summit and would look along the trail. My father knew the map and he assumed they were going to try to intercept it. I guess he knew it was serious when the rangers gave rifles to everyone because apparently there had been sightings. My father knew that was BS, but didn't say anything. He didn't want to scare anybody more than what they already were. They started to trail at a very high pace. While walking for hours, my father asked the ranger what happened to the girls. The ranger said, long story short, it was a girls' camp. Someone tore the tent, killed one of them, and partially ate her, and the other girl disappeared. Pretty fucking wild. They followed the trail for a few more hours until they stopped for a break to eat something. My father tells me that he's always comfortable in the mountains and woods, but this time, he was getting the creeps really bad. They were all sitting around a fire, speaking, talking, and eating food when he realized, along with everyone else, that there was not a single sound around them. Everything was quiet, really quiet. He grabbed his rifle, chambered a bullet, and looked out into the darkness. The only thing he could see was eyes. A bunch of different eyes, reflecting off the bonfire. Some of them were very high in the air, and some of them were close to the ground. No wolf could ever be that tall. And bears don't just stare at you like that. Plus, there isn't that many bears in one place. This was something different. Everyone took notice. The tension grew. Even my dad started getting a bit scared. He couldn't explain to me how scared he was. And then, a flash illuminated the place for a split second. It was the first ranger party. Before that split second, he could see them. He explained that they all looked like very tall people, with no clothes, over 8 feet tall. They were skinny, very low body fat. You could see all the bones. They also had parts with very pronounced muscles. They had very long hair that went almost to their waist. They were all very pale. After the first shot, they all scattered and left. But here's the scary thing. When they scatter, they all went different ways without making a single sound. There were up to 40 of them, all around the campfire, and all of them left without you hearing a single branch break. They met up with the rangers. They found the clothes of the other girl torn apart, but no body. They all went back to camp with them saying a word. My father stopped doing alpinism after that. He only started going into the mountains again about a decade and a half later, simply because I was born. We enjoyed hiking, but we never spent the night in the forest or in the mountains. If anything, we only hike in the day. The missing hikers were then reported as a bear attack that took the lives of 2 young women. My dad told me all of this when I was a teenager, didn't really believe him, but when I asked my mom about it, she confirmed that my father suddenly stopped going out into the mountains or into the woods at all, and he would never talk about it. Why? So maybe it's true, I'm not really sure. I could give you a bunch of times as a kid and young adult, but when I felt scared or paranoid playing in the woods, it's a beautiful place and I spent my entire childhood getting lost. Not literally, but out there by myself or with friends. As kids, we never got too far out there, but you could actually see the progression of us venturing further out as we got older because of all the forts and carvings that we will leave behind. This one time, like 1,000 times before, my friend and I had just graduated high school. It was our last summer of freedom, and we spent the entire summer camping and hiking out there. We had decided to try and find a new place to set up camp, and we walked for what felt like a few miles before we came to a nice clearing. The area was very new to both of us. We got the camp set up and fire going, and the plan was to wait until nightfall. We would smoke some weed and play Monopoly. For the sake of backstory on my friend and me, my friend is a small, real goofy guy, but comes from a family of foresters and always had a deep understanding of all the trees and all the different plants you came across. He had no fear of going and camping out by himself. If I spent about 10,000 hours in the woods, he had most likely spent about 5 times as that. And as we got older, I spent more time worrying about women and sports, and the woods became a place for small parties. Also, I was never brave enough to camp out alone. Even now, I wouldn't go far at all if I'm alone, because I could never shake the feeling of somebody watching me. Maybe I was just paranoid, but still, an uneasy feeling. Anyways, camp is set. The fire is going, but it's getting lower and needs some wood. The sun is down and we're both cutting up and having a good time. My friend is sitting on this little chair he always brought and is loading up this makeshift bong, and I was crouched and breaking some limbs off some of the logs that we had gathered for the fire. All of a sudden, this strong breeze cuts through the clearing. I couldn't tell you if it was the suddenness of it or what, but my friend and I both stopped and looked at each other. The breeze went just long enough to flicker our fire down to a small flame. We both sat completely still in almost total darkness. None of us said anything. Across from us, on the other side of the fire, we could hear footsteps. They sounded like somebody was running and were slow to a walk, and then run again, and by the sound of it they were pacing back and forth over the same spot. Then, just like it started, it stopped with a softer crunch on the underbrush. I knew by the sound it had crouched down. I was still and knew I was staring right at it in the dark. My friend grabbed my shoulder and said, "Buddy," and when he did, I felt the surge of fear come over me. I could tell that he was feeling the same way. I had been so fixed on the footsteps and rationalizing what I heard that I hadn't even considered being afraid. But this was true fear. It made me feel helpless. I could hear my friend after a while grab some leaves and he dropped them on the fire. For the split second when the leaves covered the fire, we were in pure darkness. Then the fire sprang to life. We both quickly grabbed more leaves and brush and threw it on the fire. I got some sticks and logs on there, and none of us took our eyes off the spot, and nothing moved for over an hour. Finally, the leaves started crunching and whatever was out there had slowly walked off. Whatever was out there was watching us without moving for far longer than any animal would. It wasn't until after the footsteps disappeared that I realized that the smell had disappeared as well. It smelled like a paper mill, almost like spoiled eggs. For the rest of the night, besides whispered remarks, none of us really moved or stopped looking at the spa. Nobody went into the tent, and I had a very short, light sleep, sitting on the ground with my head rested on my hands, and my friend never went to sleep. In the morning, we packed up and silently walked back home. To this day, we talk about it, and in the 7-8 years since it happened, my friend has never gone camping by himself out there again. Never told this story to anyone, and I don't really intend to tell it again. I have a pounding migraine today, and this thread has kept me good company as I drifted in and out. I actually don't like talking about this time in my life. When I was around 12, I lived with my mom. We were below the poor level. We lived up in the mountains around Santa Cruz, California. My mom had a friend that owned a large bit of property up there, and he let us stay in a trailer up there. Our trailer was very small and was right beside a garden. A chain-link fence ran around the garden to keep the dog the owner had out, along with other animals. All kinds of deer and things are very common in the area. Also, along the fence area was a single room. It was like a tiny house, but it was only a single room on the inside. This room had light, and since our actual trailer didn't, I spent a lot of my time in there. By the way, sorry that the story will be fairly long. I'm actually pretty bad at writing. I just want to say that first, as this will be the only time. So there's this one thing you should know right now. This small fenced-in area was only a small part of the property, but most of it was just a bunch of woods. Also, I refused to leave the fence area because the owner's dog had been mistreated by children in the past and was very sketchy towards me all the time. If I was alone, it would try to bite at me even through the fence. The fence was tall, at least 7 feet high, and wasn't even movable. So as long as the gate was closed, I was safe. With that being said, there is no one else around us for miles and miles. Now I'm telling you all this because I think it's important that you understand what kind of scene this was before I really get into the story. So we have a fenced-in location that seems fairly safe. It contains a trailer and a single room with power that is not connected to the trailer. Nothing else around for miles. My mom's van is parked out in front of the gate to the fenced-in area, and a single unpaved road runs from this garden for about a mile to the main house. Now then, I would bring friends up there to sleep over here and there. We all thought it was pretty cool. No. Besides, we would get our own room to stay in, to play video games all night long. It was like a dream come true. The only downside was simple. When it would get dark outside, it would get really dark. No city around, and the trailer would not be lit up. There was no bathroom to use in the room, and you would have to walk through the dark garden in order to get to the trailer to use it. Strange things would happen out here from time to time. It was always something that could be somewhat easily explained away though. Noises like people working at night, or once me and a friend were sitting out in the garden and we saw a shadow as big as a small bear bound up a tree, but the tree didn't shake like there was weight on it. The dog also creeped me out, but you know, angry dog and I was a kid, it happens. Now I do get scared pretty fast. I always been that way. For example, I have trouble walking through a lit house if I'm alone. My friends, however, tend to be more outgoing. Just the kinds of people I get along with. This time, I had a friend over. His name was Jacob. We were staying up all night and playing Sonic the Hedgehog 3 on my Sega Genesis. We started playing as the sun went down, and by the time we were finishing up the game it was around 2 a.m. That's when we heard it. We turned off the game, getting ready to find something else to play. There was a rumbling in the woods behind the room we were in, like somebody was rolling something really heavy around. We hadn't heard it before because the noise from what we were playing was loud. I immediately got goosebumps. Jacob was not really worried about it, but it's not like there was someone else's house a yard right over there. It was just a forest for miles, and it sounded like someone was constructing something or some shit, dragging and rolling something really heavy. Eventually, Jacob convinced me to just play some more games. I agreed on the condition that we turn the volume down so we could hear if something happened. We started playing, and I didn't even notice that the noise had stopped because I was into the game. A couple hours later, Jacob said he had to use the bathroom. I was feeling fine by then, so I was fine when he left to the trailer to relieve himself. He was taking a while, so eventually I decided I was going to go check on him. Besides, I could use the bathroom and grab a snack while I was at it. I got up and opened the door to leave, and when I opened it, he was just standing at the doorway, right outside the door, facing it. It scared the shit out of me. That's when I asked what he was doing, and he just stood there, blocking the exit. I realized he must have sneaked up to the door because I could hear him walk away from the room, but I hadn't heard him walk back up to it. It was super quiet out there without the noises of the city. I should have been able to hear, but he refused to say anything or respond. He just stood there. I told him he was really creeping me out, but it wasn't like him to try to scare me like this. Finally, I decided to just go to the trailer and use the bathroom myself. I told him what I was going to do. Then I moved past him, but when I pushed him out of my way a little, his skin felt freezing to the touch. I jumped a little, but it was a cold night, and he had been standing out there for like 30 minutes, so I figured that was to be expected. I walked as quickly as I could over to the trailer, and that's when he followed me, like right on my tail. It was unnerving. I joked a little, saying that he already surprised me by scaring me at the door. The joke is over already. Finally, I got to the trailer and walked in. He didn't follow. He just stayed at the doorway. Now, I want you to picture this. Imagine inside a trailer, with the door open in the middle of the night. and your friend is just standing outside the trailer looking in. I checked on my mom, who was fast asleep. Then I turned to go into the bathroom. It was a portal potty, and we keep the bathroom door shut because it smells bad. When I reached for the door and tried to open it, though, it was locked. That's when I heard a nervous voice come from behind the door. "I'm in here." I quickly turned to look at Jacob, but the door was still open and there was nothing there but pitch black night. I froze. I would have heard the bathroom door open if he had come in behind me and gone that way. There is no way to do it quietly. That's when I just yelled out so loud that my mom woke up. I stared at the doorway, unable to bring myself to move a muscle. She got up, walked over there, and looked out. Not seeing anything, she closed the door and asked me what was wrong. By now, Jacob was coming out of the bathroom and acting perfectly normal, but just a little bit confused. I explained what happened, and Jacob said he was just taking a long time in the bathroom, basically. None of them believed me at all, no matter how much I insist. My mom is sure that I just got sleepy and imagined it. Jacob thought I was trying to prank him, so my mom gets out a big flashlight and walks us back to the room. She tells us to go to sleep. Then she leaves and goes back to the bed herself. Now this room doesn't have any windows or anything, so after a while I calm back down a little bit. I'm telling myself that my mom was right. It must have been like a waking dream or something. Meanwhile, Jacob insists that he was in the bathroom the whole time, and I'm inclined to believe him, because there is just no way to really get around without being heard, so I settled down. But I'm a little rattled, but I'm thinking that I can just sleep it off throughout the night. Suddenly, the dog starts going nuts right behind us. The room is up against the fence, so the dog must have been like right behind the room on the other side. I guess when the dog started going nuts, I got scared because Jacob started laughing at me and said, "The dog barking at a squirrel or some shit, and you're over here shitting yourself." It keeps going like that for a long time though. Suddenly the barking stops and gets replaced by whimpering. We hear the dog run away. There's about 45 seconds of silence before we hear something new. A small stretching sound on the back wall of the room. We both try to be silent as we can. Eventually it stops. After 5 or so minutes of silence, Jacob decides to be brave. He decides that he's gonna wake up my mom, to tell her something crazy is going on. I wish he wouldn't leave me alone, but there is absolutely no way I'm gonna go out there. He arms himself as best as he can with a tennis racket we had in the room with us. Then he takes a couple small steps and opens the door and dashes out. I close it as quick as I can behind him. In less than 30 seconds I hear a scream. Not long after, the door flies open, and he comes back in looking pale as a ghost. He looks tired and his breathing is like he just ran a marathon. His eyes look as big as dinner plates. I then ask what is going on like 4 times before he finally starts getting words out. He tells me he walked out there and he was walking through the garden as quick as he could, and then he saw my mom just standing there. He tried to talk to her, but she stared at him with a blank expression, getting super creeped out because of what happened to me earlier. He took a couple more steps towards her, telling her that he thought something was in the woods. Suddenly, her face turned to an awkward smile. Then he realized something terrible. He hadn't noticed sooner because of the darkness. She was on the other side of the fence. Now, the door to this room does not lock, and as I explained earlier, this room had no windows. As he is telling me what happened, he is also at the same time putting stuff in front of the door, and by the end I was helping him. In retrospect, whatever was harassing us seemed to not want to actually enter the room or the trailer, because the Jacob one didn't come into the room or to the trailer itself. Either way, we stacked everything we could against the door, thinking somehow, like in cartoons, this would actually definitely keep the creature out. So for the rest of the night, we heard scratches coming from all around the room. I, of course, ended up crying. Jacob looked like his mind had left his body with fear. At one point, whatever was out there was speaking as well. I heard it from right next to me where I was resting against the wall, in my mother's low voice, the same exact phrasing she had used earlier in the night. "What's wrong?" followed by, "Go to sleep." The sun must have come up eventually. The scratching has well stopped. We heard my mom come to get us. This time we actually heard footsteps. We of course refused to leave the room. My mom had to go get the property owner and have him take the door off. When we saw that it was actually her, I burst into tears again. We never had any experiences like these again, and we eventually moved away. But that one night still haunts me. I still refuse to go out at night unless I'm with a bunch of people, and I will never ever live in the woods again. Anyways, I hope you all enjoy hearing about this, as I probably won't tell the story again. Thanks for listening. Or might do a trip past. Last Monday, I went on a walk into the woods. I go out of time, whether it's spring or winter. I'm 18 years old. I'm not very tall and I don't weigh much, so I'm a pretty fast runner too. Sometimes it can get really creepy out there in the woods. My mom and grandparents, they live right down the road, by the way, always told me that if I start to feel unsafe out there, I always need to leave. They never said why, but I always figured they were afraid of the coy dogs, and it never seemed that important. I did listen to them though. So Monday afternoon, maybe a bit past 4 o'clock, I left to go walking. I had been out there just 2 days before with no issues, but after walking for about half a mile, the feeling that I was being watched began. I kept walking until I came to the old logging road. It makes for a quick way around the woods, and it also connects to the road that my house and my grandparents' house are on. I was getting pretty tired of hiking through the snow-covered bushes and logs. I still felt like something was watching me, and just a few moments before I could have swore I saw something moving around from the corner of my eye. So I decided to walk down the logging road instead. As I was walking down it, I heard the sound of chains rattling nearby, and started looking around for them. I was thinking maybe it was just chains in a tree blowing in the wind, but I couldn't find any chains and I stopped hearing it after a second. I kept walking and was getting close to my grandparents' land when I heard the chains again. I stopped walking to look around me, and to check to see if maybe it was something I was wearing. My jacket, my necklace, but it wasn't anything on me. I jumped around to double check and maybe looked really stupid, but I knew it wasn't me making the noise. I decided just to go to my grandparents' house and walk back using the actual road. But as soon as I started heading into the woods, I heard something. It sounded like my own footsteps had been in time with a second pair that were maybe about 10 feet away, which made no sense because there had been nothing there just a moment ago. I took another step and heard something step at the same time from behind me. I didn't turn around, I was too afraid, so I acted as if I was going to take another step. But I stopped my foot right above the snow. I wanted to make sure I wasn't going crazy. Behind me, whatever there was, stepped down. I heard the snow crunch, then it moved forward again, quickly. It must have known I figured out it was there. That's when I started running towards my grandparents' land, and whatever was behind me followed. It sounded humanish, and the sound of the chain started up again when it started chasing me. The thing definitely had only 2 legs and it sounded pretty big. There's a lot of dorm bushes, small trees and other things that stay around all year, even in the winter. When I ran between them as best as I could, it was just going right through them. I glanced behind me for a second and all I saw was a really tall, gray, humanoid blur before I looked back in front of me. The final stretch was terrifying. I could hear heavy breathing and chains rattling just a few feet behind me the entire time, and it sounded like it was almost growling. My grandparents' dog was up in the yard near the house and started barking, but he didn't run towards me. He just stayed by the house barking. Then he ran with me to the house when I got close to him. I ran up the door and went inside. The dog came in right beside me and I slammed the door shut. I didn't hear anything and I looked out the window, but there wasn't anything there. The dog was leaning onto me and shaking. My grandfather came to the door from upstairs after just a few seconds and I started crying and told him everything. He became very serious and told me, "Don't think about it, just forget it ever happened." I tried to ask him why, but he refused to tell me anything. I tried asking my grandmother too, but she didn't say anything. And she changed the subject. "Usually were very meanzer the last time you went to a ceremony." People think that ceremonies are just peaceful and full of good energy. Don't get me wrong, they are. What people already talk about is how when a ceremony is happening, the ceremonies, they bring our people together, they ground us. We call on the spirits to help guide us and protect us. However, what people don't realize is that the stronger the ceremony is, the more work it takes, and also the purpose of the ceremony. This in turn will cause whatever evil spirits are out there to try to interrupt it. It's when they try to creep in the most. The prayers, the songs, and everything, it cause attention, and not just from what we want, but from what's lingering outside, and sometimes even with things that people bring with them. One of my friends told me this. He said that he went to a peyote meeting up in Montana. Something about it was for one of his cousins. He said everything was normal at first. People were singing, praying, doing what they do. But there was this guy who looked off, like something about him. Then, in the middle of a song, he just got up and walked out. Didn't say anything. And he didn't come back for like half an hour. But when he did, it was his turn to drum. My friend said that he watched him rub his hands together on the drumstick, like he was focused, trying to feel something. Then his hands started bleeding, and suddenly the guy looked up and said, "There is something unholy outside." By the time that the meeting ended and the people were packing up, nobody could find them. He was gone. My friend wasn't told anything about it, and he knows not to ask anything. I did ask my friend what he thought all of this was, but he didn't really give me an answer. My son James is an amazing kid, or at least he used to be. He was always so bright and adventurous, always letting his own curiosity guide him. I could barely keep up with him as he always seemed to be looking for something new and exciting to do. Then, something happened that changed my son. If we're being honest, I'm not exactly sure what caused it. It all started about a year after we had moved into our previous home. My wife and I were in this strange situation where we had to choose a new place kind of fast. So we decided upon an old farmhouse out in the sticks. We didn't have that many options. I wasn't too much of a fan of being removed from the city life. But my wife, on the other hand, was happy. She had grown up on one of these houses, and so it brought back memories of when she was a kid. The house was settled on a few acres of land and even came with its own barn. I let out a laugh at the sight of it. I even jokingly asked if I should buy a pair of overalls and a straw hat. She just jabbed me in the shoulder and we continued on to the house. Around the north edge of the property, adjacent to the barn, was a small patch of wood. The southern edge of the property overlooked some sprawling hills, and beyond that was a nearby town. I wasn't sure what James would think of his new house. He seemed a little bit upset about moving away from his friends, but he was eager to find and make new ones. Life was progressing normally for our small family. My wife and I both worked on different schedules to allow us to trade off watching our son. I had the weekends off from work, so during that time, that left me in charge. Lucky for both of us, James was 10 years old, so we didn't have to watch him every second. There wasn't a whole lot of trouble he could get himself into out here. He also behaved very well, which I attribute all of that to my wife. One weekend after living here for around 10 months, I was basically cleaning out the house as I was making my rounds throughout the house. I passed by James's room. I noticed his door was slightly open. As I got close, I gently pushed it open. I saw James standing at his bedroom window, just staring out of it. I spoke to him, asking him what he was looking at, but he didn't respond. I walked over to him, laundry basket in hand, and gently touched him on the shoulder. When I did, it was like he suddenly snapped out of a trance. He turned to look at me and I asked him if he was all right. With a smile, he told me he was fine, then proceeded to run out of the room laughing. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I thought maybe he was just daydreaming or lost in thought. Hell, I'd done even more weird things when I was a kid. However, as the weeks went by, James began staying in the room much more often. He was never the type of kid who enjoyed staying cooped up all day. He always wanted to be running around. But during that time, I could barely get him to come out of his room. Physically, he seemed fine. It was just whenever I would open his door, I would find him staring out of his window towards the barn. I had confronted him numerous times about it, but every time he would respond with not having any idea what I was talking about. I had brought this up to my wife a few times and she just always brushed it off. She told me that I was just overthinking it, and as long as he wasn't hurting himself, he was free to play how he wanted. If that involved staring out of the window, then that was fine. After a couple of months of this, I was sitting in the living room watching TV. I had gotten up to use the bathroom, which was right next to James' room. On my way back to the living room, I decided to take a peek inside to make sure he was fine. When I pushed open the door, I found the room empty. I called out his name but heard no response. I walked over to the window and glanced out of it. I saw James outside. He was standing in the middle of the field between the house and the barn. Panicked well within me as I thought something was wrong. I ran through the house and out of the front door. I called out as I ran over to him. The closer I got, I began to notice just how still James was standing. It was like he was frozen in place. I walked up beside him and rested a hand on his shoulder. Almost instantly, he snapped out of it and turned to face me. I asked him what he was doing and he just looked around for a few moments before telling me that he didn't know. He had no idea how he had gotten all the way out here. I told him it was fine if he played outside, but he had to let me know first. He apologized and we both walked back inside. But as we were walking back to the house, I got the strange feeling that something was staring at me. I glanced back over my shoulder and looked towards the barn, but there was nobody there. About 2.5 weeks after that, something else happened. It was around 1:30 in the morning when I stared awake by the noise. In my groggy state, it was hard for me to figure out the noise that had woken me up, but after a moment, my mind cleared and I realized that I should check on James, and my wife asked me what I was doing. I told her not to worry and just go back to sleep. I walked down the hall and opened James' bedroom door. The room was once again empty. I quickly moved to his window and stared out of it, but with how dark it was outside, I couldn't see him even if he was standing out there. I pulled on my shoes and coat, retrieved the flashlight, and opened the back door. When the door shut behind me, I realized that was the sound that had woken me up. I turned on the flashlight and walked across the field to the barn. Since moving in, we never used it. We did inspect it when we first bought the house, but it was just your run-of-the-mill empty barn. I never even used it to store anything. We just sorta kept it as a landmark. As I walked closer to it, I spotted movement just outside of it. I aimed my flashlight as best as I could, and when I did, I saw James entering the large wooden door of the barn. Seeing this, I called out his name and began running towards the barn. Just before I was able to reach him, the large wooden door slammed shut in my face. I called out to James once more and attempted to push the door open, but the door wouldn't even move an inch despite pushing on it as hard as I could. I looked around trying to find anything I could use to open the door, when suddenly, loud and piercing scream echoed from inside the barn. Worry and panic swirled within me as I charged at the door. With my shoulder connected, I fell inward and onto the wooden floor. I quickly stood up and shined the flashlight around. In the corner of the barn, I saw James standing there. I ran over to him and asked him what he was doing out here. He said that he didn't know and that he was scared. I hugged him and grabbed his hand, and we walked back to the house. My wife was already making her way over to us after hearing all the commotion. I told her everything was fine, but that did little to shake the concerned look from her face. Over the next couple of days, my wife and I had a long discussion about what was going on, and we decided it would be best to just demolish the whole barn. I contacted a company and they came out that following weekend to take the barn down. It was a surprisingly painless process overall, and once all was said and done, it felt like a weight had been lifted off of me. However, during this process, James seemed to become pretty depressed over the whole situation. He refused to leave his room again. He wasn't really eating and he would barely speak to us. Then one evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I walked down the hallway, and as I passed by James' room, I saw the door was cracked slightly, and I decided to make sure James was okay. I pushed the door open and found him once again standing at his window. Concerned, I walked over to him and asked him what he was looking at. He didn't answer at first. He just continued staring out of the window towards where the barn used to be. Then, after a few moments, he began to whisper. He said, "You destroyed their home. Where will they go now?" I asked James who, and he raised an arm and pointed it out of the window. I turned to look, and even though there was barely any light in the sky, I could see the reflection of what appeared to be dozens of eyes staring at me from the tree line. After raising his arm and pointing, James collapsed to the ground. I called my wife and we took him to the doctor. They ran some testing on him but haven't been able to find anything wrong with him. They just said he had suffered from a panic attack, but they didn't know what was the cause of it. Shortly after that, we moved out of that old farmhouse and into a place much closer to the city. Since then, James has been slowly getting better. But whenever I ask him about the old house and the barn, he seems to have no memory of ever living there. And this is the exact reason why I will never move to a ranch or a farm or even in the wilderness itself. You never know what is out there. There's a meaty form, so I'm not a stranger to the smell of industrial cleaners or the sounds of machines beeping in the distance. Hospitals have started to feel like a second home to me. I've been coming here throughout my whole adult life. However, recently it seems like it's every single day. My wife Hannah has been going in and out of the hospital for her entire life. She was born with a weak body and has always been prone to illnesses. However, just by looking at her, you wouldn't think that she's weak at all. She's one of those people who is always happy, always laughing, and always showing compassion in the presence of others. The same can't be said from behind closed doors. When it was just me and her, she would be so drained of energy it would leave her in the bed for days at a time. This often led her to catching some type of virus or infection that would send her right back to the hospital. As much as I hate to admit it, this has now become normal. When we first started dating, it only happened every so often. But as the years passed by, the illnesses seemed to pile on. Some people might think a relationship such as this one would be a burden. And while I do admit things have been challenging at times, I will never trade her for anything. I actually owe my life to Hannah. She saved me when I was at my lowest, and I've been grateful to her ever since. We started dating shortly after that, and we never looked back. During winter, Hannah had gotten a bad case of pneumonia, and it hit her hard. That set off a series of illnesses that compiled until she was forced to remain in the hospital. I hated seeing her like this. I felt so powerless to do anything to help her recover. Nearly halfway through the 3rd month, the doctor approached me and informed me that her condition was getting worse. They said that her body wasn't responding well to any of treatments and they were running out of different options. I was furious when I heard this. I found myself shouting at the doctor, asking him what the hell I was even paying him for. He just lowered his head before apologizing, something doctors seem to be exceptionally good at. I could feel anger rising within me. I was about to give the doctor a bit more than just a piece of my mind. When I felt something grab my arm, I looked down and saw Hannah smiling at me from her bed. Instantly, the anger all went away. I felt the weight of the entire world fall off of me. The doctor took his leave and we just sat together for hours. Hannah assured me that none of this in any way was my fault, and that regardless of what happens, she would always be with me. I hated when she spoke like that, talking like she was ready to give up and throwing everything to the wind. I told her that I needed her to focus on recovering so we could continue being happy together. She just returned a faint smile, brushed the side of my face, and said, "Okay." I knew she was just telling me what I wanted to hear, but it didn't matter. I still enjoy hearing it. I told her I was going to step outside and grab something to drink from the vending machine. I asked her if she wanted anything and she just brushed the hand. As soon as her hospital room door shut behind me, I felt like something was off. The hallway was somewhat darkened. I could no longer hear the shuffling footsteps or the beeps of machines in the distance. I couldn't even see any doctors, nurses, or patients walking around. I thought it was strange, but it was pretty late. I had been staying here later and later, trying to spend as much time with Hannah as possible. I just thought that maybe it was a slow night for the hospital. Then I pondered if hospitals even have slow nights. I went up to the vending machine and retrieved my wallet. I stood there carefully examining all my options, when suddenly I heard a voice from behind me say, "What's it gonna be?" I nearly jumped out of my skin and spun around. Standing behind me was an older-looking man. He was sporting a decent-looking suit and a hat, and brandishing a cane even though it didn't seem like he needed one. He greeted me with a big smile and I just nervously nodded back to him. I turned back around. I quickly decided on a drink and stepped aside for the old man to use the machine. He just stood there smiling at me. After a few months, Hannah's condition began to change. Her vitals and demeanor were improving. The doctors couldn't explain it. Hannah just started expressing how she never felt this good before. We went home about halfway through the 4th month in the hospital. Since then, the years began to fly by and it was like Hannah had become a completely new person. She was still herself, of course, but so much brighter. We traveled the world together, doing all the things we never could before. She still couldn't explain how this happened. Things in our life had never been better. Until 6 years since that hospital night passed. I suddenly started to have terrible nightmares. At first, I wasn't sure what was happening. Hannah would wake me up in the middle of the night to tell me I was screaming and struggling in my sleep. Strange, I had no memory of such a nightmare. As the weeks passed, I began waking myself up in a cold sweat, but still having no memory of what caused it. This continued for weeks, and while Hannah was growing weary for me, I just chalked it up to work-related stress. Then, after around 6 months, I began to notice something strange. Whenever I would drive home from work at night, I thought I could see people standing outside in the dark. At first, I thought it was my eyes just playing tricks on me. But the more it started to happen, the more I realized that wasn't the case. I chose not to tell Hannah about this as I didn't want her to worry. I honestly thought that I had become so overworked that I was starting to hallucinate. I tried to ignore it and hoped that it would just go away. During that time, Hannah could tell that something was wrong. She was always asking me if I was okay, to which I would smile and tell her I was fine. About a week ago, I was startled awake once again by some nightmare. I sat up in my bed and looked to Hannah, who was still asleep next to me. I smiled at her, got up and grabbed a glass of water. As I started drinking from the glass, I walked over to the living room window and looked outside. The glass slipped from my hand and broke on the floor. There were hundreds of silhouettes all standing outside of our house, and more were appearing by the vanette. Hannah came rushing out asking if I was all right. I snapped from the window and looked down. I apologized to her and told her that my hand must have slipped. She grabbed some paper towels and walked over to me. She looked out of the window and asked me what I was staring at. I told her nothing, but that was a lie. Those faceless people were all standing there outside of our house. Last night, as I was taking so much needed time off from work, was cleaning up the house. I sat there on the couch in the days when I heard Hannah say something from the kitchen. She said, "Wow, 7 years already." I glanced over and asked her what she was talking about. She said it's almost been 7 years since that night in the hospital. When I heard this, my body got tense. She noticed my expression and asked what was wrong. I just shook my head and told her it was nothing, just bad memories from that season. That night, as Hannah drifted off to sleep, I sat down at my desk and began to write this out. The reason that I want to get all of this down was because of what Hannah had said earlier. She said it's been 7 years since that night, and despite all the time that has passed since then, I still remember that night at the hospital. I remember the old man and the conversation that we had together. After I got my drink and moved to the side of the vending machine, I asked the old man if he was going to use it, but he just continued staring at me. A few seconds later, he began to speak. "You're here for your wife, aren't you?" I was stunned when I heard this. Yeah? How do you know?" The man raised a hand to me. "It's all over your face. I know it's your partner or child." And I just took a guess. I chuckled quietly to myself and nodded. He then said something to me which at that time I didn't even think too much of. He said, "What would you give to fix your condition?" "Anything." I responded. I didn't even think twice about it. "Well, I might be able to help you. I know some people who might be able to do something about the situation that your wife is in." At the time, I thought he was referring to like the chief of medicine or something like that. I quickly asked if he could help, and he nodded. "These things have a price. Name it." I replied without missing a beat. The old man thought for a few minutes. He turned to me and told me to think of a number between 1 and 10. It was a weird question, but I just glanced around for a moment before deciding upon a number. He then held out a hand to me, looked me in the eyes, and asked me very directly, "Would you like for me to save your wife?" "Yes," I said, gripping his hand tightly and shaking it. "Very well," he answered. He retrieved his hand from my grip, slightly bowed towards me, and walked off down the hallway. The whole interaction was weird, but as soon as I entered the hospital room, all of my thoughts vanished when I saw Hannah sleeping there. I brushed the hair from her face and hoped that she would be all right. I'm not sure what's going to happen next. All these troubling experiences, the nightmares, and the faceless people that have been appearing before me, everything seems to be coming together. I just wanted to say that I don't regret whatever happens. I'm glad for the time that I got to spend with my wife, and I'm glad that she's still here with me. I just wish I would have chosen the number 10 instead of 7. I was writing all this down at first, but now I'm just typing it on the computer instead. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I can see a bunch of people standing behind me from the reflection of the computer screen. Either way, I'm ready. Let's see what happens. Hannah, my love, if you wake up and I'm not here, I'm sorry for not telling you what I did. Just know that the last 7 years of my life have been the best ever. I love you. Of nice days, sat on the edge of Lake Talton. A body of water This is my first post, and it's a true story. I was living in Oklahoma with my mother at a small lake house, and I'm around 10 or 11 at this time. I'm sleeping in my bedroom when I randomly wake up for no reason. This was not normal for me, and I felt very uneasy. The only sound I could hear was my mother snoring in the next room. I turned over and tried to go back to sleep, but my need to use the bathroom was growing, so I forced myself to head that way. The bathroom is on the other side of the house, around a corner and past the kitchen, and finally down a long hallway on the right. So after I made the trip and finished my business, I flipped off the light switch and started heading back to bed. That's when I heard the distant click of the light switch and I saw the glow of the bathroom light in the hallway. Terrified, I slowly turned around just to witness the light in the bathroom start clicking on and off. Finally, it turned completely off. In the dark of the hallway, my eyes began to make out a white shape near the end of the hall. It was around my size and crouched to the floor. At this point, I'm frozen to the spot as my mind begins realizing that no one else is home, except for my mom and myself. Then this white figure began to whisper in a quiet voice of a man, "Help me, I'm lost." I remember wanting to scream for my mom, but I couldn't, and instead I barely said no before this thing starts running at me on what sounded like all fours. I quickly ran through the kitchen and around the corner, before running to my sleeping mother, shaking her awake. She asked me what was going on, and I saw her eyes look over my shoulder before she screamed. Remembering her scream still makes my blood run cold. Never had I heard pure fear like that in my life, even to this day. She then grabs me by the arms and pulls me into my room and slams the door shut. She holds me in her arms with her back pressed against the door as we listen. It sounded like this thing was running around in circles in the kitchen. We could hear hands and feet slapping against the tile. The kitchen had a sliding glass door to the outside, which sounded like it was thrown open then slammed. We sat there horrified until daybreak. I was sent to my grandmother's in the next town for a while after that, and never set foot in that house again. Years later, my mother said she went walking around the property after the incident and came across a small burial site with 3 headstones that each belonged to children from the early 1900s. It freaks me out because what I heard that night was a man's voice, but it was very unnatural. My mom still won't tell me what she saw behind me and what it was that made her scream. She tells me that she's afraid it will know that we're talking about it and it will come back. This is the first of many weird things that have happened in my life. You had nasawerb from Paul Nighto. Alex, Jim, and I decided to go camping. We set up camp, decided to just drink and talk, and that's what we did all night about anything and everything that came to mind. It was 3 a.m. and we were still chatting away until we heard something in the trees, some kind of cracking sound. Could be a bird, said Jim. A big damn bird, I replied with slight confusion. Could be a monkey, joked Alex. We shared the laugh and ignored the sound and continued to talk. Another half hour had passed and the sound had completely stopped. I wonder what that was anyway, Alex said. Well, I have no clue, I replied, taking a sip of my beer. Well, I hope it's gone because I need a piss, Jim said, standing up and heading to the trees. A few minutes passed and Alex and I grew concerned. We best go look for him, said Alex. He sounded a little annoyed. We stood up and walked in the direction Jim went. It didn't take long to find the first drop of blood and then the trail that led deeper into the woods. What the fuck, I said, shaking. We began shouting for him following the trail. I was the first to see him standing in the clearing about 10 meters away. He was facing away from us. We tried shouting, but we got no response. We walked closer and we noticed him twitching violently. He was covered in blood and clearly beat up. I was about to say his name once again, but the word got stuck in my throat. When I saw the bloody pile of meat on the floor next to him, I think Alex saw it too, as he also went silent. As if by magic, Jim turned to us and we saw his face was literally hanging off and underneath was pale gray skin. We could also see a burning orange eye and part of a wide mouth with long sharp teeth where the skin was peeled off. Besides from this, Jim looked normal aside from a few cuts and bruises. As we stared into the single orange eye, the thing wearing Jim's skin pushed the peeling flesh back on and there Jim stood totally normal. Hey guys, let's go for a walk, he said in his normal voice. This theme also seemed to demonstrate excitement. Alex and I turned. We ran past our campsite and got straight in the car, parked about a mile from our tent. I'm not sure if this Jim followed us. I swear I could hear thumping footsteps behind Alex and I. We reached the car and jumped in, pouring sweat and heaving. I started the car faster than ever before and drove it nearly 100 miles per hour all the way back home. When we arrived and got out, I walked around the back of the car only to see scratch marks on the bumper. I shivered as I realized how close he must have been. This was over 40 years ago. Alex never quite recovered, and last I heard he was living in a mental hospital. I was thinking I may have to join him as I'm pretty sure I saw Jim a few weeks ago at a bar. I thought I was mad until I did some research. I would have done it sooner, but I'm an old man now and we didn't have Google back in the day. I'm pretty sure we encountered a skinwalker, and it may have found me after 40 years and I think it wants to finish the job. And now it's pretty strange that I keep getting letters asking to catch up from my old friend Jim. Distus risotine. If the time stops at 1:09 a.m., roll over and pray that they think that you're asleep if you're wondering who they are. Well, that's the weird part. It's your family or your roommate or whoever you live with. I never heard of this happening before, so I'm not sure what I can really do about it other than pretend I'm sleeping, of course. That's the only thing that really seems to keep them docile. Let me explain what's been happening in a little more detail. This has been going on for the past 3 nights now. I didn't really think too much of it the first night because honestly, I thought my family was putting some prank on me. That is until last night when I was attacked by my own wife. The first night was a pretty early night for my wife Kelsey and my twin boys Eric and Aaron. All of us were out cold by 9 p.m. We had a pretty long day of splitting wood to stock up for the upcoming winter. That night, I woke up to an odd silence in the house, like everyone had left and I was alone in the house. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. It was 1:09 a.m. I looked over just to check if my wife was still asleep, and when I found the bed empty, I sat up and looked around. The house was pitch black other than the hot light by my boys' room that we left on, and with that light I could see 3 shadows cast along the hallway wall as my bedroom was left open. Kelsey, I called out. That's when I saw the 3 shadows twitch at the sound of my voice, like they were startled. Kels, I called just a bit louder. This time, a shiver went down my spine as all 3 heads of the shadows looked in my direction. What the fuck? I whispered to myself, tossing the blankets off from me as I got up to investigate. I tiptoed to my door with a feeling of unease growing in the pit of my stomach. Once I got to the door, I peeked around and was pretty creeped out at what I saw. Kelsey and the boys were all standing still, with their bodies turned towards the boys' room. Their necks were straining to stare directly at me. Huge smiles, that looked painful to maintain, were on all of their faces. What the hell are you guys doing? I asked with a chuckle, thinking they were playing a joke on me. Now that I think back at it, it doesn't even make much sense thinking they were joking. After all, why would they get up in the middle of the night for that, when there's no guarantee that I would even wake up? Their bodies made a twitchy, unnatural movement at the sound of my voice, which made me jump back in surprise. This was when I really started to think something might be wrong. A feeling of dread washed over me and I began to sweat. Then the sound of the clock on the microwave began to beep, and as it rang through the house it made me jump in the air as I let out a startled yell. My voice turned instantly and walked back into their room. Kelsey doing the same. Her smile disappeared and she walked by me like a zombie and crawled back in bed, snoring as if she were sleeping the whole time. Confused as hell, I walked back to my side of the bed and checked the time on my phone. What the fuck? I said to myself as I noticed the time. 1:10 a.m. No way that only a minute had passed since I first woke up. It had to have been at a very minimum of 5 minutes. Still though, I shook it off and got back into bed, deciding to bring it up to Kelsey in the morning. The next morning I woke up and everything was back to normal. I could hear the boys playing in the living room and smelled bacon and eggs as Kelsey cooked breakfast. I got up and walked out with a smile as I remembered their little joke from the night before. "Good morning, pranksters," I said with a laugh. They all stared at me with a confused look on their faces. "Huh?" my wife finally said. "Last night all of you standing in the hallway smiling at me. Gotta admit it was a good one. It sure creeped me out a little bit though," I said, shaking my head. "Ryan, don't even joke like that. You know those creepy smiling people stories freak me out." Kelsey scolded. "Hey, you're the one trying to freak me out in the middle of the night." I said, "By the way, how in the hell did you get the phones to stop at 109? That was a good touch." My whole family was looking at me like I was a nut job. Then they all started shouting it wasn't funny and that I was scaring them. I was shocked. I didn't know if they were still in on the joke or if somehow they had all been sleepwalking. That wouldn't explain the time though. "All right, y'all," I shouted. "I must have been having a damn dream. Don't freak out on me, shit." I turned and walked back into the room even more confused than ever. I knew I wasn't dreaming. Were they serious about their little prank or did they not actually remember? Either way, I figured I would settle it that night. I would simply record them with my phone. If they try to do it again, that's gonna ruin their joke pretty quick. Satisfied with my plan, I went about my day. The boys helped me split more wood while Kelsey did some running in town. Before I knew it, it was nighttime again and we were all in bed. I made sure to have my phone charged and right next to me ready to catch them in the act. Once again, I woke up hours later and that same eerie silence filled the house. This time, my adrenaline started pumping as the feeling of dread hit me like a ton of bricks. I grabbed my phone and lit the screen up. 109 a.m. I tried to switch it to record, but my phone was frozen. "Fuck," I whispered, yelled. I looked over to the hall and saw the same shadows as the night before, but this time a little bit closer. My blood ran cold as I noticed out of the corner of my eye that the TV was left on, but the picture was frozen. It seemed that all electronics were frozen or something, adding to the creepy feeling that was engulfing my body. I got up once again and tiptoed to the door. I peeked my head around and I had a color in my mouth to quiet a scream. Kelsey and the boys were standing facing me directly this time, only somehow their smiles even bigger than before, and now that they were a good 5 feet closer, I could see just how wide open and bloodshot their eyes were. When I moved my hand to cover my mouth, all 3 of them took a giant step towards me. Naturally, I took a step back. They mimicked with another huge step. This time, since Kelsey was bigger than the boys, she stepped ahead. She was now maybe 3 to 5 feet away, her eyes opening even wider as she looked extremely excited. I turned around to jump back in bed, and as I did, I heard loud footsteps as they gave chase. That's when I felt huge blows hit my back, a lot stronger than any of them should be able to inflict. "What the fuck, y'all?" I shouted as my back started to hurt from the impact. I was now in bed and I yanked the covers over my head. It was childish, I know, but hey, I wasn't about to strike my wife. Thankfully, as I lay still, the blow stopped and I heard heavy breathing from what I assumed was Kelsey, only it sounded way too deep and raspy. Then the breathing stopped altogether and silence filled the room. "I know you're not asleep," she whispered so fast I barely made out what she said. Just then the beeping of the microwave filled the house and the TV resumed. I heard the sound of soft footsteps leave the room as the boys went back to their rooms, followed by pressure next to me in bed as Kelsey climbed back under the covers. I quickly grabbed my phone and checked the time, 1:10 a.m. This doesn't make any fucking sense. I did my best to go back to sleep, but needless to say, I didn't sleep much. I tossed and turned as I tried to figure out what the fuck was happening. I tried to figure out what steps to take next. The only thing I could think of was to pretend that I was asleep next time, since my lack of movement seemed to stop the blows. If they thought I was asleep altogether, maybe they would just stand creeping in the hallway. It was worth the shot, I guess. I'll update tomorrow and let you guys know how last night went for me. It was still extremely scary. But hey, I didn't get attacked, so that's a start, right? I got another plan for tonight too, but I'll just put that in the update tomorrow. Wish me luck, and if anyone's got any ideas what to do here, please feel free to help me.